Hello, friends. Welcome to the Sleep Aliens. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. You ever work security at a place where the nearest living soul is 12 miles away? This was Hawthorne Army Depot. You ever hear a kind of silence that's so heavy it's thick in your mouth and tongue? This was Hawthorne Army Depot. It's 680 square miles of Nevada desert sprawled out before you like a barren wasteland. Ammunition bunkers arranged like dominoes standing on end, and more explosive ordnance on hand than would suffice to blow a small nation back into the Stone Age. And then there's nightfall. Travis Kellerman had been working security at Hawthorne for 3 years when it happened. He'd seen his share of weird things out there. Coyotes acting strange, temperature drops that made no meteorological sense, equipment failures that maintenance could never explain. But nothing prepared him for February 14th, 2019. Valentine's Day. He remembers that because his wife had been pissed he'd taken the overnight shift. 12-hour rotation, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., patrolling the southern sector where they kept the older munitions. Bunkers dating back to World War II, some of them. Thick concrete, earth-covered mounds that looked like burial sites in the moonlight. The shift started normal enough. Travis checked in at the guard station, got his assignment sheet, confirmed radio contact with Central Dispatch. His partner that night was supposed to be Marcus, but Marcus had called in sick. Food poisoning, allegedly. So Travis was solo. Not ideal, but not uncommon either. Budget cuts meant they were always running lean. He climbed into the white Ford F-250, security decals on both sides, and started his route. The depot has a grid system, sectors labeled by letters and numbers. His assignment covered sectors K through P, bunkers 34 through 58. 24 bunkers total, each one requiring a visual inspection, a check of the access locks, and a notation in the log. The temperature was dropping fast. It had been 42 degrees at the start of his shift. By 10 p.m., it was 31. By 11 p.m., 26. Travis had the heater cranking, country music playing low on the radio, just enough to keep the silence from pressing in too hard. Bunker 47 sat at the far western edge of his patrol route. It was one of the older structures built in 1943, used primarily for artillery shell storage. The access road leading to it was gravel, poorly maintained, full of potholes that could crack an axle if you weren't careful. Travis hated going out there, but it was part of the job. He reached the turnoff at 11:47 p.m. He remembers the time exactly because he glanced at the dashboard clock and thought about how he was almost halfway through the shift. Just 6 more hours. 6 more hours, and he'd be home, sleeping next to his wife, forgetting about this frozen wasteland for another day. That's when he saw the light. At first, Travis thought it was a helicopter. They occasionally had military choppers doing training exercises, though usually not this late, and usually not without prior notification. But this light wasn't moving like a helicopter. It wasn't moving at all. It hung in the air, maybe 200 feet up, directly above Bunker 47. Perfectly still. No sound, no rotor wash kicking up dust. Just a white light, bright enough to cast shadows but not blinding. Steady, unwavering. Travis stopped the truck about 50 yards from the bunker and killed the engine. His training kicked in. Assess the situation, report anomalies, don't approach unknowns without backup. He grabbed his radio. Central, this is Unit 7. I've got an unidentified light source over Bunker 47, Sector L. Requesting visual confirmation from Tower. Over. Static crackled back. Then Elise Mora's voice, the overnight dispatcher. Unit 7, repeat that? You said unidentified light source? Affirmative. Stationary. Approximately 200 feet altitude, directly over Bunker 47. No sound. No apparent propulsion. Can tower confirm visual? A pause, longer than it should have been, then, Unit 7, tower has no visual on your location. Radar shows nothing in your sector. Are you certain about your coordinates? Travis looked at his GPS unit mounted on the dash. Coordinates confirmed. He was exactly where he said he was. He looked back at the light. Still there. Still motionless. Central, I'm looking right at it. White light, bright, not moving. How can radar show nothing? Unknown, Unit 7. Recommend you maintain distance and continue observation. I'm logging this as a code yellow. Unexplained phenomenon. Do not approach. Travis didn't need to be told twice. He kept the engine off, rolled down his window despite the cold, and watched. The light didn't flicker. Didn't dim. It just hung there, as if someone had nailed it to the sky. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Travis's fingers were going numb from the cold, but he couldn't look away. There was something wrong about that light. It wasn't just the fact that it shouldn't be there. It was the quality of the light itself. It didn't diffuse the way normal light does. There was no halo, no scatter. Just this perfect sphere of white radiance, edges so sharp you could cut yourself on them. At 12:03 a.m., the light moved. Not fast, not dramatically. It just slid sideways, maybe 30 feet to the left, and stopped again. Perfectly smooth. No acceleration, no deceleration. Like watching a cursor move across a screen, Travis's heart rate spiked. Central, the light just moved. Lateral displacement, approximately 30 feet west, still no sound. Copy that, Unit 7. Still no radar contact. Are your electronics functioning normally? He checked. Dash lights were on, GPS working, radio working. But when he tried to start the engine, nothing happened. The key turned, the dashboard lit up, but the starter didn't engage. No click, no whir, nothing. Central, my vehicle won't start. Electrical seems fine, but the starter's dead. Copy. Remain in vehicle, Unit 7. I'm dispatching Unit 3 to your location, ETA 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Travis looked at the light again. It had moved again, this time closer to the bunker, maybe 20 feet above the roof now. And that's when he noticed something else. The shadows were wrong. The light should have been casting shadows in all directions, radiating outward. But the shadows only fell in one direction, straight toward Travis. Every rock, every sagebrush, every imperfection in the bunker's surface cast a shadow that pointed at him like an accusing finger. He felt his skin crawl. That's when the most unsettling thing happened. The light went out. Not gradually, not like someone dimming a switch. It just ceased to exist, as if someone had cut the power to the universe. And in that sudden darkness, Travis heard something. A hum. Low frequency. Deep. He felt it more than heard it, vibrating in his chest cavity, making his teeth ache. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, and then it stopped. The night returned to normal silence. No wind, no animals. Just Travis sitting in a dead truck in the middle of nowhere staring at the spot where the light had been. He tried the ignition again. This time, the engine roared to life immediately. Travis didn't wait for Unit 3. He put the truck in drive and got the hell out of there. Radio protocol be damned. He made it back to the guard station in 14 minutes, record time on those roads. When he stumbled into the office, Elise was waiting for him. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. Travis told her everything. She logged it. filed a report. An investigation team came out the next morning and found nothing unusual at Bunker 47. No radiation, no burn marks, no damage to the structure. The bunker's access log showed no unauthorized entry, but when they pulled the security camera footage from the tower, the one that should have captured Travis's entire patrol route, there was a gap. 11:47 p.m. to 12:21 a.m. 34 minutes of missing footage. The timestamp jumped, but the recording itself just stopped and started again, like someone had edited it out. The official report called it an equipment malfunction with possible perceptual distortion due to fatigue. Travis knew better. And 3 weeks later, when he put in his notice and took a job at a shopping mall in Reno, nobody questioned why. Because by then, 2 other guards had reported seeing lights over the southern sector, and one of them, Rodriguez, had a story that made Travis's look tame. Carlos Rodriguez had a rule about the depot: never take the midnight shift during a new moon. He'd been working security there for 7 years, longer than almost anyone else on the team, and he'd learned to trust his gut. But when Jensen called in with a family emergency and they needed someone to cover sectors A through G on March 8, 2019, Rodriguez couldn't say no. Double pay. Overtime. His daughter's birthday was coming up, and she wanted one of those expensive gaming computers. So he took it. New moon. No starlight. Just the kind of darkness that swallows everything whole. Rodriguez started his shift at midnight. The northern sector was different from the southern sector where Travis had his incident. Newer bunkers, better roads, more frequent patrols, but also more isolated. The nearest guard station was 8 miles away, and cell phone coverage was non-existent out there. If something went wrong, you were on your own until you could reach a radio tower. The first 3 hours were uneventful. Rodriguez made his rounds, checked his bunkers, logged his inspections. He was ahead of schedule, actually. By 3:15 a.m., he'd cleared sectors A through D and was heading into sector E when he noticed something odd. His headlights were dimming. Not failing, just dimming. Like someone was slowly turning down the brightness. He tapped the dashboard, checked the battery gauge. Everything looked normal, but the road ahead was getting darker. His high beams barely cutting through 20 feet now instead of the usual 60. Then the radio started acting up. Unit 4, do you copy? Unit 4, Elisa's voice crackled in and out, drowned in waves of static that sounded almost rhythmic, like breathing. Rodriguez grabbed the handset. Central, this is Unit 4. I'm getting interference. Can you boost signal? Nothing but static. And underneath it, that rhythm. In, out, in, out. He was passing Bunker 12 when his engine cut out. No warning, no cough or sputter. The truck just died, rolling to a stop in the middle of the access road. Dashboard lights flickered once, twice, then went dark. The radio died with them. Complete silence. Complete darkness. Rodriguez sat there for maybe 10 seconds, letting his eyes adjust. The darkness was so absolute that he couldn't see his own hands on the steering wheel. He couldn't see the road. Couldn't see the bunker he knew was 30 feet to his right. It was like sitting in a sensory deprivation tank. Then he saw the glow. Not a light, a glow. Faint, pale blue, coming from somewhere ahead and to the left. It pulsed gently, almost imperceptibly, like bioluminescence in deep ocean water. Rodriguez felt every instinct screaming at him to stay in the truck, lock the doors, wait it out. But his training said otherwise. Investigate, document, report. He grabbed his flashlight from the passenger seat, a heavy mag light, 4D batteries, and tried clicking it on. Dead. He tried his backup light. Also dead. Even his watch had stopped, the second hand frozen at 3:17. The glow was getting brighter. Rodriguez made a decision. He opened the truck door, the interior light didn't come on, and stepped out onto the gravel. The cold hit him immediately, but it wasn't a natural cold. This was the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, that makes your joints ache, that feels almost intentional. He started walking towards the glow, not because he wanted to, because something in his head was telling him he needed to. The thought wasn't his own. He knew that, even as he followed it. It was like someone had reached into his brain and flipped a switch labeled "Walk Forward." The glow was coming from inside Bunker 12. That shouldn't have been possible. Bunker 12 was sealed. Thick steel door, 3 separate locks, all accounted for on his inspection log. But as Rodriguez approached, he could see the door was open. Not broken, not forced, just open, standing ajar about 6 inches, and that pale blue light seeping out through the gap. He stopped 10 feet from the entrance. His body was moving on autopilot, but some part of his conscious mind was still fighting, still screaming at him to run. He could see his breath in the air, thick white clouds that didn't dissipate but hung there, suspended, like the air itself had frozen solid. Then he heard the sound, a high-pitched whine, just at the edge of hearing. It was coming from inside the bunker, oscillating up and down in frequency, and underneath it, that same rhythmic pattern from the radio. In, out, in, out. Rodriguez's hand was reaching for the door when his radio suddenly screamed to life. "Unit 4! Rodriguez, do not approach the bunker! Rodriguez, respond!" Elise's voice was pure panic. That snapped something in him, broke whatever hold had been dragging him forward. He stumbled backward, nearly fell, caught himself on a boulder. His truck's engine roared to life behind him, headlights blazing at full brightness. The door to Bunker 12 slammed shut. The blue glow vanished. The whine cut off. Rodriguez ran. He didn't walk. He didn't jog. He sprinted back to his truck, threw himself into the driver's seat and floored it. The tires kicked up gravel as he fishtailed down the access road, not caring about procedure, not caring about speed limits, just needing to get the hell away from Bunker 12. He made it back to the guard station in 9 minutes. When he burst through the door, Elise was standing there with 2 other guards, Patterson and Lou. All 3 of them looked shaken. "What happened?" Rodriguez demanded. "How did you know I was at Bunker 12? Elise pointed at the monitor showing the security camera feeds. "We've been watching you for the last hour. You've been sitting in your truck outside Bunker 12, engine running, not moving. We've been trying to raise you on the radio for 45 minutes. Rodriguez felt the floor tilt. "What? No. I was only there for a few minutes. My truck died. I got out. I walked to the bunker. Carlos." Patterson stepped forward, his face grave. "We watched you the whole time. You never left your truck. You've been sitting there at 3:17 for the last hour." Rodriguez looked at his watch. Still frozen at 3:17. He looked at the wall clock. 4:23 a.m., 66 minutes missing. They pulled his truck's dashcam footage. The camera had recorded the entire event from Rodriguez's perspective. Headlights dimming, engine cutting out, everything going dark. But the internal cab camera told a different story. In that footage, Rodriguez never moved. He sat in the driver's seat, engine running, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead at Bunker 12. For 66 minutes, he didn't blink, didn't shift position, didn't breathe visibly. He just sat there, frozen, while his external camera showed darkness and the bunker door standing open. The investigation team arrived at dawn. They inspected Bunker 12 thoroughly. The door was locked, all 3 locks engaged exactly as they should be. No sign of forced entry. no sign of anything unusual. Except for one thing. Inside the bunker, on the concrete floor, they found a thin layer of frost. A perfect circle, 12 feet in diameter, coating the floor in crystalline ice. In the center of that circle was a single boot print. It matched Rodriguez's boots exactly. But Rodriguez swore he never set foot inside that bunker. The cameras agreed with him. He'd never left his truck. Yet, somehow his boot print was inside a locked bunker, in the center of a circle of ice that shouldn't exist in the Nevada desert. The official report called it unauthorized entry with unexplained environmental anomaly. Rodriguez was suspended pending investigation. He was cleared 3 weeks later when they couldn't prove he'd tampered with the locks or manufactured the evidence. But he never went back to Hawthorne. He took a job in Las Vegas, doing security at a casino. He told his wife it was for better pay. He told his friends it was for better hours. But late at night, when he can't sleep, he still thinks about those 66 minutes. What happened during that time? Where was his consciousness while his body sat frozen in that truck? And why does he sometimes wake up with his watch stopped at 3:17, even though he's checked the battery 100 times and it always works fine? Not everyone who works at Hawthorne is military or security. The depot relies on civilian contractors for a lot of support operations: maintenance, transport, logistics. One of the biggest operations is ammunition transfer. Trucks coming in from manufacturers, trucks hauling to military bases, a constant flow of ordnance moving through the dough. James Dalton drove trucks for Apex Freight, a civilian contractor that had been working with Hawthorne for 15 years. He'd been making runs to the depot twice a month since 2015, and he knew the routes better than anyone. Highway 95 south from Fallon, turn off at Whiskey Flats Road, check in at the main gate, follow the escort to whichever bunker needed servicing. Simple work. Good pay. Boring as hell, which is exactly how Dalton liked it. April 3rd, 2019, was supposed to be a standard run. Pick up a load of decommissioned artillery shells from Bunker 31, transport them to Toole Army Depot in Utah for disposal. Straightforward. He'd done the same run probably 40 times. He arrived at Hawthorne at 6 o'clock p.m., checked in with the gate guards, and waited for his escort. Protocol required that civilian trucks be accompanied by security vehicles whenever they entered active munitions areas. Dalton had been through this routine so many times he could do it in his sleep. His escort that night was a guard named Sarah Kim. Young, maybe 25, relatively new to the depot. She was professional enough, did her job, followed protocol. But Dalton could tell she was still getting used to the isolation. Most people either adapted quickly or washed out within 3 months. They reached Bunker 31 at 6:47 p.m., just as the sun was setting. The loading crew was already there, 3 guys in reflective vests operating a forklift. Standard procedure. They'd load the shells into Dalton's truck, secure them according to DOT regulations, fill out the paperwork, and he'd be on his way. 2 hours, tops. Except the forklift wouldn't start. "Battery's dead," one of the crew said, scratching his head. "That's weird. We just used it this morning." They tried jumping it from one of the security vehicles. Nothing. Tried a different forklift, also dead. Finally, after an hour of troubleshooting, they managed to get a third forklift running long enough to load half the cargo. Then that one died too. By 9:30 p.m., everyone was frustrated. The loading supervisor made a call to base operations, and they decided to postpone the rest of the loading until morning. Dalton would stay overnight in his truck, not uncommon for long hauls, and they'd finish up first thing. "You good sleeping here?" Kim asked him. "There's a break room at the guard station if you want." "I'm fine," Dalton said. He'd slept in his cab plenty of times, had a decent mattress in the sleeper berth, portable heater, supplies for a few days if needed. "Just radio me when you're ready to load in the morning." Kim nodded and headed back to her patrol vehicle. The loading crew packed up and left, and suddenly Dalton was alone at Bunker 31 with half a load of artillery shells and the sound of wind scraping across the desert. He climbed into the sleeper berth, set an alarm for 6 o'clock a.m., and tried to get comfortable. The temperature was dropping fast, supposed to hit the low 20s overnight. He cranked the diesel heater, pulled a blanket over himself, and closed his eyes. He woke up at 2:14 a.m., not because of his alarm, not because of a sound. He woke up because his truck was vibrating, not the engine, that was off. This was something else, a low-frequency vibration, almost subsonic, that made the entire cab shudder. His coffee mug, sitting in the cup holder, was skittering across the dashboard. The windows were rattling in their frames. Dalton sat up and looked outside. Darkness. Complete, absolute darkness. His parking lights should have been on, he always left them on overnight, but they were off. He reached for the ignition, tried to start the engine. Click. No turnover. Then he saw the lights through the windshield. 3 of them. Small, reddish-orange, moving in formation about 100 feet off the ground. They were coming from the east, moving slowly, silently. As they got closer, Dalton could see they weren't helicopters or planes. They were just lights, spheres of colored radiance, each about the size of a basketball, floating through the air like they were on invisible wires. The vibration in the truck intensified. His teeth were chattering, but not from cold, from the frequency. It was rattling his skull. He could feel it in his sinuses, in his jaw, behind his eyes. The lights stopped directly above his truck. For a long moment, nothing happened. They just hovered there, arranged in a perfect triangle. Then, slowly, they began to descend. Dalton's first instinct was to run. But where? He was miles from the nearest guard station in the middle of a restricted area, surrounded by explosive ordnance, and something told him that running wouldn't help. Whatever these things were, if they wanted him, they'd get him. So he stayed in the cab and watched. The lights came down until they were level with his windshield, maybe 10 feet away. This close, he could see they weren't solid. They looked like dense clouds of luminous gas, swirling internally, pulsing with that same rhythm he'd heard in the other stories. In, out, in, out. Then his radio turned on. Not static this time. A voice. Clear, precise, completely flat in effect. James Michael Dalton, age 41, born Boise, Idaho. Commercial driver's license Class A. No criminal record. Blood type O positive. Dalton's blood ran cold. That was his information. All correct. But the voice wasn't human. It had no inflection, no emotion. It sounded like a text-to-speech program, but coming through an AM radio frequency. Remain in vehicle. Do not attempt communication. Do not attempt to exit vehicle. Remain in vehicle. The message repeated 3 times. Then the radio cut off. The lights began to move again, but not away. They spread out, one positioning itself at each corner of the truck. Front driver, front passenger, rear. From his position in the sleeper berth, Dalton had a clear view of the one at the rear. It was changing color, red to orange, orange to yellow, yellow to white. Each transition smooth, gradual. And as it changed color, Dalton noticed something else. His truck was getting lighter. Not light as in bright, light as in weight. He could feel it in his gut, that sensation you get in an elevator when it starts moving up. His stomach was dropping. The truck was being lifted. He scrambled to the driver's seat and looked at the side mirror. The ground was falling away. Slowly, smoothly, but definitely falling away. 20 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet. His truck was in the air. Dalton's mind fractured. This wasn't possible. Trucks don't fly. 40,000 pounds of metal and cargo don't just float upward. but it was happening. The altimeter on his GPS, usually used for calculating mountain grades, was climbing. 80 feet, 100 feet, 120 feet. Then the lights shifted from white to blue. Everything stopped. Not just the ascent. Everything. The vibration cut off. The silence was so profound that Dalton could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the blood rushing through his ears. He looked out the windshield and realized he was surrounded by darkness so complete that it didn't make sense. No stars, no ground lights, no moon, just void. He was suspended in nothing, held by forces he couldn't understand, in a place that shouldn't exist, and in that moment, James Dalton understood true terror. Not fear of death, not fear of pain, fear of insignificance. The realization that he was so utterly powerless, so utterly small, that whatever intelligence was doing this to him could simply decide he didn't matter and erase him from existence. The lights turned green, and Dalton was back on the ground. His truck jolted slightly as the tires settled onto gravel. The parking lights flickered on. The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m. 3 minutes. The entire experience had lasted 3 minutes. But when Dalton climbed out of the cab on shaking legs and walked around to inspect his truck, he found something that told him those 3 minutes had been much, much longer. His tires were cold. Not just cool from the night air, actually cold. When he pressed his hand to the rubber, it was like touching ice. Frost had formed in the treads. The metal wheel hubs were cold enough that his fingers stuck to them for a second before he yanked them away. The cargo straps securing his load, heavy-duty ratchet straps rated for 10,000 pounds each, were covered in a thin layer of frost. When he touched one, it crumbled. The metal was brittle, like it had been flash-frozen in liquid nitrogen. And his GPS unit showed something impossible. The last recorded position wasn't Bunker 31. It wasn't even Hawthorne. According to the GPS log, at 2:14 a.m., his truck had been 23 miles southeast of the depot, in the middle of the Gabbs Valley Range, an area with no roads, no way for a 40-foot semi to access. Yet there it was. A single GPS ping, showing his truck in a location it couldn't possibly reach, at an altitude of 7,800 feet. When morning came and the loading crew returned, they found Dalton sitting on the ground next to his truck, staring at nothing. Kim tried talking to him, but he didn't respond. They called for medical support, thinking he might be having a stroke or some kind of breakdown. The paramedics arrived and checked him over. Physically, he was fine. But his pupils were dilated, and he was non-responsive to questions. They transported him to the hospital in Hawthorne, where he stayed for observation overnight. When he finally started talking again, he told them what happened. They documented it, filed a report. The investigation team came to look at his truck. They found the frost damage on the straps, couldn't explain it. Found the GPS anomaly, couldn't explain it. They interviewed Dalton, Kim, the loading crew. Nobody had seen or heard anything unusual, except for one thing. A security camera positioned on Bunker 29, about a quarter mile from where Dalton was parked, had captured something odd. The timestamp was corrupted, so they couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but the footage showed a brief flash of light in the distance. Not bright enough to illuminate much, just a quick pulse, white to blue to green. And when they enhanced the image as much as possible, they could make out a shape in that flash. It looked like a truck, suspended in midair, surrounded by 3 points of light. Dalton never drove for Apex Freight again. He moved back to Idaho, took a local delivery job that kept him in the city. He doesn't talk about what happened. Not to his wife, not to his friends, not to anyone. But he keeps the broken cargo strap in his garage, sealed in a plastic bag. Physical evidence that it wasn't a dream, that something really did lift his truck into the air and take him somewhere, or somewhen, that defied everything he thought he understood about reality. The Hawthorne depot had dealt with strange incidents before. Equipment malfunctions, wildlife behaving oddly, the occasional lost hiker wandering into restricted zones. But 3 major unexplained events in less than 2 months? That got attention. May 2019. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division sent a team to conduct what they called a comprehensive safety and security assessment. Translation: figure out what the hell is going on before someone gets hurt or a story leaks to the media. The team was led by Special Agent Victoria Lansing, a no-nonsense investigator who'd spent 15 years looking into everything from theft to murder at military installations worldwide. She'd seen her share of strange cases, but Hawthorne was turning into something different. She interviewed everyone involved: Travis, Rodriguez, Dalton, all the witnesses. She reviewed the security footage, examined the physical evidence, consulted with electronics experts about the equipment failures. She even brought in a geologist to check for unusual magnetic fields or seismic activity that might explain the phenomena. Nothing added up. The stories were consistent, too consistent to be fabrications, but too bizarre to be credible. The physical evidence was real, but unexplainable. The equipment failures had no technical cause. The GPS anomalies violated known physics. And then, on May 19, 2019, everything converged. Lansing had set up a command post at the main guard station, using it as her base of operations for the investigation. She'd been there for 3 weeks, working 16-hour days, trying to find a rational explanation. That night, she decided to do something unusual. She wanted to see the depot at night from the perspective of the guards. She convinced Patterson, one of the veteran guards who'd been there the night Rodriguez disappeared into his 66 lost minutes, to take her on a patrol. They left at 11 p.m., taking Patterson's standard route through sectors M through R. Clear night, half moon, good visibility. They passed Bunker 47, where Travis had seen his light. Nothing unusual. They passed Bunker 12, where Rodriguez had his incident. Also quiet. They were approaching the southern access road near where Dalton had been parked when Patterson's radio crackled. Unit 5, this is Central. We're picking up something weird on radar. Multiple contacts, low altitude, moving erratically. Over. Patterson grabbed the handset. Central, this is Unit 5. Can you clarify? Aircraft? Negative, Unit 5. Contacts are too small and moving too fast. They're not showing up as standard aircraft, and they're converging on Sector N, right where you are. Lansing felt her pulse quicken. Where exactly in Sector N? Near Bunker 31, the old ammunition storage facility. That's where Dalton had been. That's where his truck had been lifted. Patterson looked at Lansing. We should head back. If there's something happening... No, Lansing said. We go toward it. That's why I'm here. Patterson hesitated, then nodded. He'd been a soldier before becoming a civilian guard. He understood orders. He turned the vehicle toward Bunker 31 and accelerated. They arrived at 11:23 p.m. The bunker sat alone on its concrete pad, exactly as it should. Nothing unusual. No lights, no sounds, no signs of activity. Then the temperature dropped. 15 degrees in 10 seconds. Lansing watched the truck's external thermometer plummet from 51 to 36, her breath suddenly visible in the air. Frost forming on the windshield. What the hell? Patterson started to say. The lights appeared. Not 3 this time. Dozens. Small points of reddish-orange light emerging from behind the bunker, rising into the air like embers from a fire. They spread out in a perfect circle, surrounding the bunker, surrounding Patterson's truck. Lansing grabbed her phone to take video. Dead. Patterson tried the radio, static. The truck's engine coughed and died. The lights began to pulse in sequence. One would brighten, then dim, then the next, moving around the circle like a wave, faster and faster, until they were just a blur of color. And as they moved, that familiar sound started. The low-frequency hum that Travis had heard, that Rodriguez had felt, that Dalton had experienced. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere. It was inside Lansing's chest, vibrating her ribs. She could feel it in her teeth, in her skull. And then she heard the voice, not through the radio this time, through the air itself, through her bones, through some channel of perception she didn't know she had. Observation complete. Data sufficient. Interference level acceptable. Proceeding to Phase 3. The words meant nothing to her, but the feeling behind them was unmistakable. This wasn't a message to her. This was something she was overhearing, like listening to a phone conversation not meant for your ears. The lights suddenly shot upward, all at once, forming a column of light that stretched from the ground to the sky. Inside that column, Lansing could see something. Not a craft, not a vehicle. Just space that didn't belong. A vertical tear in the air itself, through which she could see stars that weren't in the right positions. Constellations she didn't recognize. Darkness that went deeper than any Earth night. And through that tear, something looked back. She couldn't describe it, couldn't process it. Her brain simply rejected the input, filed it away as other, as something that existed outside the categories her mind could handle. But she felt its attention. She felt it see her. The tear closed. The lights vanished. The hum stopped. Temperature returned to normal so fast that Lansing's skin burned from the sudden warmth. The truck's engine started on its own. The radio crackled back to life. Unit 5, do you copy? Unit 5, respond. Patterson, are you there? Patterson grabbed the handset with a shaking hand. Central, we're here. We're okay. What happened? We lost all telemetry on your vehicle. Radar showed you disappearing for a pause. For 14 minutes. Lansing looked at her watch. 11:37 p.m. They'd arrived at 11:23. According to her perception, maybe 2 minutes had passed. According to Central, they'd been gone for 14. Central, we need a full investigation team out here. Now. Something happened at Bunker 31. Something... Patterson struggled for words. Something we can't explain. But when the investigation team arrived at dawn, they found nothing. No unusual readings, no physical evidence, no damage to the bunker or the surrounding area. The security cameras showed Patterson's truck arriving, sitting still for 14 minutes, then driving away. They showed no lights, no column, no tear in reality, except Lansing's phone had turned back on. And buried in the memory, in the millisecond before it had died, the camera had captured one frame. The image was corrupted, digital artifacts scattered across it. But in the center, clear enough to see, was that vertical column of light. And inside it, a shape, dark, irregular, impossible to define clearly. But if you looked at it long enough, if you let your eyes unfocus just right, you could almost convince yourself it looked like a hand. A massive hand reaching down from somewhere else, touching the ground at Hawthorne Army Depot. Lansing's final report to CID was classified immediately. She was reassigned to a desk job in Washington, D.C., far from Nevada, far from the depot. The official conclusion of her investigation: unexplained phenomena likely attributable to experimental aircraft testing, atmospheric conditions, and perceptual errors under stress. Nobody believed it, not really, but it was the explanation that went into the records, the one that kept questions from being asked. Travis, Rodriguez, Dalton, Patterson, Lansing, none of them ever talked about what they experienced. Not publicly. But sometimes, late at night, they'd find themselves looking up at the sky, wondering, waiting. because whatever had been studying Hawthorne, whatever intelligence had been conducting its observations, had said something important. Proceeding to Phase 3. Phase 1 and Phase 2 were over. Phase 3 was coming. And nobody knew what that meant. Cole Brennan had been watching convoys pass through Hawthorne Army Depot for 6 months, and he'd gotten pretty good at predicting how long each one would take. A standard ammunition transport, 6 vehicles, traveling at the regulation 25 miles per hour through the depot's interior roads, 14 minutes and 30 seconds from Checkpoint Alpha to Checkpoint Bravo, like clockwork. So when the convoy, on June 12th, 2019, took 14 minutes and 53 seconds, Cole noticed immediately. 23 seconds. That's all it was. A rounding error. A slight delay for a pothole or a moment of caution on a tight turn. Nothing worth noting in the official log. But Cole had learned to trust his instincts during his 4 years in Army intelligence before becoming a civilian contractor at Hawthorne. Small anomalies often pointed to bigger problems. He was stationed at Observation Post Delta, a concrete bunker positioned on an elevated ridge overlooking the main east-west corridor through the depot. His job was simple: monitor vehicle traffic, maintain visual confirmation that convoys followed authorized routes, report any deviations or security concerns. 12-hour shifts, 4 days on, 3 days off. Boring work, mostly, which is exactly why the 23 seconds bothered him. The convoy consisted of 6 M915 line haul tractors, each pulling a 40-foot flatbed trailer loaded with palletized ammunition containers. Standard configuration. The lead vehicle was driven by a sergeant named DeMarco. Cole recognized him from previous runs. Professional driver, former Marine, never had an incident in his record. The rest of the convoy was staffed by a mix of active duty personnel and experienced civilian contractors. Cole watched them through his spotting scope as they passed Checkpoint Alpha at 14:37:15 hours. He noted the time in his log, started his stopwatch out of habit, and followed their progress along the main road. The first 4 vehicles passed through his field of vision without incident. Steady speed, proper intervals between vehicles, no issues. The 5th truck came into view, then the 6th, both maintaining formation. Cole tracked them as they approached the curve near Bunker Complex 18, a particularly long stretch of road with good visibility. That's when his radio cut out. Not static, not interference. Just silence. The background hiss that he'd grown so accustomed to simply vanished, replaced by an absence of sound so complete that Cole actually tapped the radio to make sure it was still on. The power light was green. The battery indicator showed full charge. But no sound came from the speaker. He looked back through his spotting scope. The convoy was still there, still moving, but something was different. The light had changed. It took him a moment to identify what he was seeing. The shadows had disappeared. All 6 trucks were moving through full sunlight, but they weren't casting shadows on the road. The sagebrush beside the road had no shadows. Even the distant mountains had lost their definition, flattened into a strange 2-dimensional backdrop. Cole blinked hard, thinking maybe the heat shimmer was playing tricks on his eyes. When he looked again, everything was normal. Shadows back. Radio hissing softly with background static. The convoy rolling along exactly as it should. He checked his stopwatch. 14:51:48. 23 seconds. The convoy had taken exactly 23 seconds longer than it should have. Cole made a note in his log, but didn't call it in. What would he say? The shadows disappeared for a moment? My radio went silent, but I can't prove it. He'd been doing this job long enough to know that unexplained anomalies without solid evidence just made you look unreliable. but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened. Something he'd witnessed but couldn't quite process. The convoy reached Checkpoint Bravo at 14:52:08. Cole radioed ahead to confirm arrival. "Bravo, this is Delta. Convoy Alpha 6 arriving your position. 6 vehicles, all accounted for. Over." Delta, Bravo confirms. 6 vehicles accounted for. Convoy proceeding to loading zone. Over. Standard exchange, everything normal. Cole filed his log and settled in for the rest of his shift, trying to forget about those 23 seconds. Then, 3 hours later, his supervisor called him. "Cole, it's Jackson. We've got a situation with Convoy Alpha 6. I need you to pull your observation footage from this afternoon." Cole felt his stomach tighten. What kind of situation? "Just pull the footage. Bring it to the operations center, now." The Hawthorne Operations Center occupied a low-slung building near the main administration complex, a windowless structure that housed the depot's security monitoring systems, communications hub, and command staff offices. Cole had been there plenty of times for briefings and debriefings, but the atmosphere today was different. Tense. Jackson met him at the door. Mark Jackson had been the operations supervisor at Hawthorne for 12 years, a former Army captain who'd seen action in Iraq and Afghanistan. He wasn't the type to get rattled easily, but when Cole saw his face, he knew something was seriously wrong. "Follow me," Jackson said, not bothering with pleasantries. They walked through the operations center to a secure viewing room in the back. Inside, 3 other people were already present. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, the depot commander, Dr. Sarah Vance, the civilian safety officer, and Technical Sergeant Marissa Torres, head of the Security Monitoring Division. "Mr. Brennan," Reeves said, not standing, "tell me about Convoy Alpha 6 this afternoon. Everything you observed." Cole ran through his report. 6 vehicles, routine passage, noted arrival times at checkpoints Alpha and Bravo. He hesitated, then mentioned the 23-second discrepancy in the momentary radio silence. "You noted a timing anomaly?" Torres leaned forward. "Did you document this?" "In my log, yes. But it was only 23 seconds. Could have been a dozen legitimate reasons. Show me your footage," Reeves interrupted. Cole connected his observation post's dash cam to the viewing room's main monitor. The camera system was standard issue, forward-facing, wide angle, recording continuously during duty hours. He queued up the footage from 14:37:15 when the convoy passed Checkpoint Alpha. They watched in silence as the 6 trucks appeared on screen, moving through the frame in proper formation. Everything looked exactly as Cole remembered. Until 14:51:25. The footage jumped. Not a skip or a glitch. A clean cut. One frame showing the convoy approaching the curve near Bunker Complex 18. The next frame showing the same convoy in almost the same position, but 23 seconds later according to the timestamp. "Jesus," Jackson muttered. Torres rewound the footage and played it again. Same result. The timeline clearly showed a gap. 14:51:25:08 to 14:51:48:17. 23 seconds of missing footage. "Equipment malfunction?" Vance suggested. "Storage buffer error?" Torres shook her head. "The camera system has redundant recording. If there's a buffer error, it flags it in the log. There's no flag here. The system thinks it recorded continuously." "What about the other observation posts?" Reeves asked. Posts Echo and Foxtrot should have had visual on that stretch of road. Torres pulled up their footage. Post Echo's camera showed the same clean cut at exactly the same timestamp. Post Foxtrot's feed had static interference during that period. 23 seconds of scrambled video, then returned to normal. 3 separate camera systems, Torres said quietly. all showing the same anomaly at the same time. Reeves stood and walked to the window, looking out over the depot. I want every recording device that had any line of sight to that corridor. Security cameras, dash cams, personal devices if anyone was recording. And I want the convoy drivers interviewed immediately, all of them. Sir, Cole said, if I may ask, why is this such a priority? It's just a timing anomaly. Could be a lot of explanations that don't involve, the drivers don't remember it. Reeves cut him off. We interviewed Sergeant DeMarco 30 minutes ago. He has no memory of that 23 seconds. None of them do. 6 trained personnel, all experiencing the same gap in memory at the exact same time. The room fell silent. Cole felt a chill run down his spine. That's not possible. And yet, Reeves said, turning back to face them, here we are. Sergeant Anthony DeMarco had been driving military vehicles for 16 years. He'd transported ammunition through Iraq during the surge, driven supply convoys through Afghanistan's mountain passes, handled hazmat materials in a dozen countries. He was not the kind of person who lost focus or blanked out behind the wheel. But when they sat him down in the interview room and asked him about the stretch of road between Checkpoint Alpha and Checkpoint Bravo, specifically about the 7 minutes starting at 14:45, he drew a blank. Not a fuzzy memory, not a vague recollection. A complete absence of memory, like someone had taken a scalpel and cut that specific period from his brain. Dr. Vance conducted the interview, with Torres and Cole observing from behind one-way glass. Reeves had insisted Cole be present. As the primary witness, he might notice details others would miss. Sergeant DeMarco, Vance began, her voice calm and professional. I want you to walk me through your route this afternoon, starting from Checkpoint Alpha. Take your time. Include as much detail as you can remember. DeMarco nodded. We departed the loading zone at 13:45, convoy of 6 vehicles, all carrying Class 1.1 munitions. Proceeded through the West Gate, standard route to Checkpoint Alpha. Weather was clear, temperature around 85 degrees, no wind. We reached Alpha at approximately 14:37. Good, and after Alpha? We continued east on the main corridor. Speed maintained at 25 miles per hour, proper spacing between vehicles. I was monitoring the convoy channel on radio, everything nominal. The road was in good condition, no obstacles or concerns. Do you remember passing Bunker Complex 18? DeMarco paused. Yes. We passed it. Must have. It's right there on the route. But do you remember actively passing it, seeing it out your window? Another pause, longer this time. Cole could see uncertainty creeping into DeMarco's expression. I remember approaching the complex. There's that long curve, you have to slow down slightly. And then I remember straightening out after the curve, accelerating back to 25, and we were about half a mile from Checkpoint Bravo. DeMarco's brow furrowed. But that doesn't make sense. The curve and the straightaway, there should be more in between. I should remember more. What do you remember between entering the curve and coming out of it? Nothing. It's like someone edited a video. One scene ends, the next begins, but there's no transition, no continuity. He looked directly at Vance. What happened out there? That's what we're trying to determine. Did you experience any unusual sensations during the drive? Dizziness, disorientation, anything that might indicate a medical issue? No, I felt fine. I feel fine now. But that gap, it's there. I know it's there. They interviewed the other 5 drivers separately. All of them reported the exact same experience. They remembered approaching Bunker Complex 18. They remembered coming out of the curve and seeing Checkpoint Bravo ahead. but none of them could recall the 23 seconds in between. The second driver, a specialist named Thompson, put it best. It's like blinking, but when your eyes open, you're a little further down the road than you should be. You know time passed, but you can't account for it. The third driver was a civilian contractor named Patricia Gomez. She'd been driving trucks for commercial freight companies for 20 years before taking the Hawthorne job. She was visibly shaken during her interview. "I've never lost time like that," she said. "Never. Not from fatigue, not from distraction. Never. You're behind a wheel, you're aware of every second. That's the job. But this, I can't explain this." "Could it have been microsleep?" Vance asked. "A very brief episode where you zoned out?" "For exactly 23 seconds, all 6 of us, at exactly the same time." Gomez shook her head. "No, something happened out there. Something happened to us." Cole watched from behind the glass as Torres compiled the interviews into a preliminary report. The pattern was undeniable. 6 drivers, 6 identical gaps in memory, perfectly synchronized with the missing camera footage. "This doesn't make medical sense," Vance said, joining them behind the glass. "Simultaneous memory loss across multiple individuals would require either a shared environmental trigger, toxic exposure, electromagnetic interference, or, well, something I don't have a framework for explaining." "Could it be psychological?" Cole asked. "Some kind of mass suggestion?" "These are trained personnel who don't know each other well. They weren't in communication during that period. We checked the radio logs. There's no mechanism for mass suggestion." Torres pulled up a digital map of the depot on her tablet. "Let's look at the location. Bunker Complex 18 is right here." She indicated a cluster of structures along the main corridor. "It's one of our older sections, built in the early 1960s, currently storing conventional artillery ammunition, nothing exotic. What's the security classification?" Reeves had entered the room quietly, listening. "Standard restricted area, no special access requirements beyond basic depot clearance." Torres zoomed in on the map. "But there is something interesting. Complex 18 sits at the intersection of 3 different security zones. It's technically in Zone 7, but it borders Zones 8 and 12. Why is that relevant?" "Because Zone 12 is where we had those incidents last month. The unexplained equipment failures, the communication blackouts, Travis Kellerman's report about the light over Bunker 47. That was Zone 12. Cole felt his pulse quicken. "You're saying there's a pattern?" "I'm saying there's a geographic correlation. Multiple unexplained events, all occurring within a 3-mile radius of each other, all in the southern sector of the depot." Torres highlighted an area on the map. "Right here." Reeves studied the map in silence for a long moment. "I want a full environmental survey of that area. Electromagnetic readings, radiation levels, seismic activity, everything. And I want it done tonight." "Sir," Vance said carefully, "if there is something environmental causing these effects, sending more people into the area could be. I'm aware of the risks, Doctor. But we have hundreds of personnel working at this depot every day. If there's a hazard, we need to identify it immediately. Assemble a survey team. Full protective gear, continuous monitoring, 2-person rule at all times. Cole, I want you with them." "Sir, I'm not trained for environmental." "You were there. You saw it happen in real time. You might notice something the sensors can't detect." Reeves turned to Torres. "Who else was on duty during the convoy's transit? Any other observation posts or patrol units in that sector?" Torres checked her log. "Observation post Echo, but we already have their footage, and wait." She scrolled through the records. There was a maintenance crew working at Bunker 21, about a mile north of Complex 18. 3-person team doing routine electrical work. Get them in here, now. I want to know if they saw or experienced anything unusual. The maintenance crew arrived 40 minutes later. Lead electrician was a man named Frank Navarro, 56 years old, 20 years with the depot. He and his 2 crew members, Janet Riley and Marcus Hunt, looked confused about being summoned to the operations center. "We didn't do anything wrong," Navarro said immediately. "The work at Bunker 21 was by the book, all permits filed, all safety protocols. This isn't about your work," Reeves assured him. "We're investigating an incident that occurred this afternoon around 1451. You were at Bunker 21 at that time. Did you notice anything unusual?" Navarro exchanged glances with his crew. "Unusual how?" "Anything. Strange sounds, lights, equipment malfunctions, gaps in time." Another exchange of looks. Then Riley spoke up. "The lights went out." Everyone in the room turned to her. "Explain," Reeves said. "We were inside Bunker 21, working on the junction box. It's all interior work, so we had work lights set up. Around, I don't know exactly when, but mid-afternoon sometime. All the lights cut out at once. Not just our work lights, our headlamps too, and the emergency lights in the bunker. Everything. For how long?" "That's the weird part," Hunt said. "It felt like just a second, maybe 2, but when the lights came back on, Frank's watch had stopped." Navarro held up his wrist, showing an old analog watch. "It's been running 23 minutes slow since this afternoon. I keep setting it, but it won't stay set, like something messed with the mechanism." Torres wrote furiously in her notes. 23 minutes? Are you sure?" "Positive. I synchronized it with my phone this morning, and now it's off by exactly 23 minutes. He paused. "Why? What does that have to do with anything?" Nobody answered him, because they all knew. 23 minutes. 23 seconds. The numbers were too similar to be coincidence. Cole felt his mouth go dry. "Where were you when this happened? Inside the bunker?" "Yeah, all 3 of us. Why?" "Did you look outside? See anything?" Navarro shook his head. "No, the lights came back on. We finished the work. We left. Didn't think anything of it until now." Vance pulled Torres aside, speaking in a low voice that Cole had to strain to hear. "Bunker 21 is a mile north of the convoy route. Whatever caused this, if it's environmental, has a large radius of effect. Or it's not environmental at all," Torres said. "Then what is it?" No one had an answer. The environmental survey team assembled at 20 hours, just as the sun was setting over the Nevada desert. 6 people: Cole, Torres, 2 technicians from the depot's environmental safety division named Rachel Pine and David Ortiz, and 2 security escorts, Corporal Hayes and Private First Class Johnson. They loaded into 2 vehicles, a security SUV and a truck carrying the survey equipment. Cole rode with Torres in the SUV, watching the landscape fade into darkness as they headed south toward Bunker Complex 18. "You don't have to do this," Torres said, breaking the silence. "Reeves couldn't actually order you. You're a contractor." "I know. So why are you here?" Cole thought about that. "Because I saw something this afternoon, or didn't see something, and I need to understand what it was." They reached the perimeter of Complex 18 at 2023. Pine and Ortiz began setting up their equipment: electromagnetic field meters, radiation detectors, atmospheric sensors, and several high-resolution cameras on tripods. The security escorts established a perimeter, keeping watch in case any wildlife or unauthorized personnel wandered into the area. Cole stood near the edge of the road, right about where the convoy would have been when the 23 seconds disappeared. The night was remarkably clear, stars visible in the sky above, temperature dropping fast. A typical desert night, nothing unusual, except for the silence. Cole had been in the Nevada desert plenty of times, at all hours. There was always sound, wind rustling through brush, distant animal calls, the occasional vehicle on a far-off road. But here now, there was nothing. Complete stillness. "Torres," he said quietly, "you hearing this?" She paused, tilting her head. "I don't hear anything." "Exactly." She understood immediately. "Hayes, Johnson, do you hear any ambient noise? Wildlife, wind, anything?" Both security escorts stopped and listened. Hayes spoke first. "No, Sergeant, now that you mention it, that's weird. There's usually coyotes out here at night." Pine looked up from her equipment. EM field readings are normal. Background radiation slightly elevated, but within acceptable parameters for a munitions storage area. Atmospheric composition is... She stopped, staring at her monitor. "Wait, that can't be right." "What?" "The air pressure just spiked. I'm reading a sudden increase of 12 millibars in the last 30 seconds. Ortiz checked his own equipment. "Confirmed. Atmospheric pressure is rising rapidly. No meteorological explanation for it. And temperature is dropping. Lost 6 degrees in the last minute." Cole felt his breath coming faster. This was how it started this afternoon. The sudden changes, the sense that something was fundamentally wrong with the environment. "Everyone back to the vehicles," Torres ordered. "Now." They moved quickly but didn't panic. Professional training kept everyone focused. Pine and Ortiz grabbed their equipment. Hayes and Johnson took up defensive positions, scanning the darkness. Cole and Torres headed for the SUV. That's when the lights appeared. Not the same configuration Cole had read about in the other reports. Not stationary spheres or moving formations. These lights came from beneath the ground. All along the road, spaced about 20 feet apart, circles of pale blue luminescence began glowing through the asphalt. Each circle was perhaps 3 feet in diameter, pulsing slowly, like the road itself was breathing. "What the hell?" Hayes raised his rifle, not aiming at anything specific, just reacting to the wrongness of it. "Don't fire," Torres commanded. "Everyone stay calm. Document everything." Ortiz had the presence of mind to keep his camera running. The circles of light grew brighter, and Cole could see now that they weren't just surface phenomena. The light was coming from somewhere deep below, shining up through the ground as if the earth had become translucent. "Radiation levels spiking," Pine shouted. 20 times background, 40. This isn't safe. We need to evacuate. Move, everyone to the vehicles." Torres was already running. Cole was right behind her, but he couldn't stop looking at the lights. There was something hypnotic about them, something that made his feet feel heavy, made the idea of running seem less urgent than the need to stay and watch. He shook his head, breaking the trance. No. That's what happened to the convoy. They watched. They lost time. They lost memory. He couldn't let it happen again. Cole forced himself to turn away and sprint for the SUV. He'd almost reached it when he heard Johnson scream. He whipped around. The private was standing in the middle of the road, rifle dropped at his feet, staring at one of the light circles. His mouth was open, but no sound was coming out anymore. His eyes were wide, unblinking, reflecting the blue glow. Hayes grabbed him, trying to pull him away. "Johnson, move! Come on, man, move!" But Johnson didn't move. He was frozen, locked in place like a statue. Hayes tried harder, pulling with both arms, and finally Johnson stumbled forward. But his expression didn't change. Vacant, absent. They got him into the truck. Cole and Torres reached the SUV. Pine and Ortiz were already inside, equipment abandoned on the road. Torres turned the ignition and the engine roared to life. Through the windshield, Cole could see the circles of light beginning to fade, growing dimmer, the blue glow retreating back into the ground. "Go! Go, go!" Hayes was shouting into the radio from the truck. Both vehicles accelerated, tires spinning on the gravel shoulder before catching traction. They roared away from Complex 18, not slowing until they'd put 2 miles between themselves and the lights. Torres pulled over at a safe distance and grabbed the radio. "Operations, this is Torres. We have a medical emergency. Private Johnson is unresponsive. Recommend immediate medevac to Fallon Hospital." Torres, operations copies. Describe unresponsive. Is he breathing? Affirmative, breathing normally. Pupils reactive to light. But he's not responding to verbal commands or physical stimuli. He's in some kind of fugue state. A long pause. Then Reeves's voice came through. "Get him to the hospital. The rest of you return to Operations Center immediately. We need a full debriefing." They arrived at the Operations Center at 2114. Johnson had been transferred to an ambulance and was en route to the hospital. The rest of the team gathered in the briefing room where Reeves and Vance were waiting. Ortiz immediately connected his camera to the display monitor. "Sir, you need to see this." They watched the footage in silence, the lights appearing through the ground, pulsing, growing brighter. Johnson freezing in place. The evacuation. And then, right at the end of the footage before Ortiz reached the truck, something else. A shadow. It was barely visible against the darkness, but it was there. A shape moving across one of the light circles. Not a human shape, too large, too angular, moving in a way that didn't match any animal or person. It crossed from one circle to another, and for just a fraction of a second it became partially illuminated by the blue glow. Ortiz paused the footage on that frame. The image was grainy, degraded by the low light and fast movement, but the outline was clear enough to see. It looked mechanical, almost insectoid. Multiple limbs or appendages arranged in a configuration that made no biological or engineering sense. And where its body intersected with the light, the glow seemed to bend around it, creating distortion patterns like heat shimmer. "What is that?" Vance whispered. Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Reeves stared at the frozen image for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. Cole could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was enough. "This is Colonel Reeves at Hawthorne. Authorization code Delta 79er Kilo. I need to report a Class X incident." A pause. "Yes, I'm aware of the protocol. Multiple witnesses, visual and sensor documentation, potential exposure of personnel." Another pause, longer this time. "Understood. We'll secure the area and await your team." He hung up and looked at everyone in the room. "As of now, this entire incident is classified. You will not discuss it with anyone outside this room. You will not mention it in official logs or personal communications. A specialized team will arrive tomorrow to take over the investigation." "Sir," Torres said carefully, "who did you just call?" "People who deal with things that shouldn't exist," Reeves said, "and who have been tracking incidents at this depot for longer than any of us have worked here." The specialized team arrived at 0008 hours the next morning. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in civilian clothes, driving unmarked vehicles. They didn't introduce themselves with names, just identification numbers. Agent 177, Agent 203, and Agent 241. They took over the Operations Center briefing room and spent 12 hours reviewing every piece of evidence. Camera footage, sensor readings, interview transcripts, medical reports. They asked questions, made notes, and revealed nothing about what they knew or what they were thinking. Cole was interviewed 3 times. Each time, they asked slightly different versions of the same questions, cross-referencing his answers, looking for inconsistencies. By the third interview, he understood what they were doing. They weren't trying to find out what he knew. They were trying to determine what he'd figured out. On the second day, Agent 241 called Cole into a private meeting. She was in her 40s, with graying hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent time in military intelligence. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Brennan, how much do you know about Project Blue Book?" Cole blinked. The Air Force UFO investigation program. Shut down in 1969? Officially shut down, she corrected. In reality, it was compartmentalized and distributed across multiple agencies. Different parts of the government handled different aspects of unexplained phenomena. We're one of those parts. Who's we? You don't need to know that. What you need to know is that Hawthorne Army Depot has been an area of interest for 43 years. Since 1976, we've documented 17 incidents of unexplained phenomena within the depot's boundaries. The frequency has been increasing. 5 incidents in the last 18 months alone. She pulled out a tablet and displayed a map. Colored markers indicated incident locations, dates, and types. Cole immediately recognized several from the stories he'd heard. Travis Kellerman's light over Bunker 47, Rodriguez's missing 66 minutes, James Dalton's truck levitation. "There's a pattern," Agent 241 continued. "All incidents occur within a specific geographic area, roughly 3 square miles. All involve some form of temporal distortion, missing time, frozen time, or looped time. All involve electromagnetic anomalies, and all occur within close proximity to underground structures." Underground structures? You mean the bunkers? Not exactly. The bunkers were built over something that was already here. We've known about it since the depot was established in 1930, but we couldn't study it without compromising operational security. The military needed this facility for ammunition storage. Our research had to take a back seat. Cole felt a chill. "What's underground?" "We don't know. Ground-penetrating radar shows cavities and tunnel systems that don't match any known geology. The structures appear artificial, but dating methods suggest they're at least 10,000 years old, possibly much older. That's impossible. There was no civilization in Nevada 10,000 years ago capable of building underground complexes that emit electromagnetic pulses and create temporal distortions." Agent 241 smiled slightly. "You're right. There wasn't a human civilization capable of that." The implication hung in the air. Cole struggled to process it. "You're saying..." "What? That there's an alien installation under Hawthorne?" "I'm saying there's something under Hawthorne that predates human civilization, that responds to certain triggers, possibly vibration from vehicle traffic, and that has been increasingly active in recent years. Why it's becoming more active, we don't know. What its purpose is, we don't know. Whether it's extraterrestrial, terrestrial, but non-human, or something else entirely, we don't know. But you've been studying it for 40 years, and we've learned almost nothing. Because every time we try to investigate directly, we lose time. Equipment fails. Memories disappear. It's as if the phenomenon has a defensive mechanism that prevents observation." Agent 241 swiped to a different screen on the tablet. It showed a graph of incident frequency over time. The line was relatively flat until 2015, then began climbing sharply. Something changed 4 years ago. The incidents became more frequent, more intense. We think the phenomenon is either waking up after a long dormancy, or it's reacting to something in the environment. What could make it react? We've considered many possibilities. Increased traffic in the depot, seismic activity from nearby testing ranges, even solar radiation patterns. But the correlation that makes most sense, She paused, as if deciding whether to continue. It started becoming more active after we expanded ammunition storage in the southern sector. Specifically after we began storing high-energy explosive compounds in bunkers directly above the underground structures. Cole felt his stomach drop. You're saying we've been stacking explosives on top of something that's already unstable? Not unstable. Reactive. And yes, that concerns us greatly, which is why I'm telling you this. Your observation post overlooks the most active area. You're in a position to notice things before they escalate. We need you to be our early warning system. You want me to spy for you. We want you to keep doing your job, but with awareness of what you're looking for. If you see temporal anomalies, electromagnetic effects, visual distortions, anything unusual, you report it directly to me. She handed him a card with nothing but a phone number. This is a secure line. It bypasses the depot's chain of command. Call it immediately if you observe anything. Cole took the card, his mind reeling. What about Johnson, the private who was affected during our survey? He's being held for observation at a secure facility. His condition is unchanged. He's conscious and physically healthy, but he has no memory of the last 36 hours. He doesn't remember the survey, doesn't remember the lights, doesn't remember freezing in the road. Just like the convoy drivers. Will he recover? In previous cases, most individuals recovered their baseline function within 72 hours, but they never recovered the missing memories. Those are gone permanently. Jesus, how many people has this affected? Over the last 43 years, at least 67 that we know of. Probably more that were never documented. She stood, indicating the meeting was over. Go back to your normal duties, Mr. Brennan. Watch carefully. And if the pattern holds true, you'll see something again within the next 2 to 4 weeks. Whatever is down there is operating on some kind of cycle. It's active, then dormant, then active again. What happens if it doesn't go dormant? What happens if it just keeps escalating? Agent 241's expression was grim. Then we'll have to make some very difficult decisions about whether this depot can continue operating, and what we do about the facility underneath it. Cole returned to Observation Post Delta the next day. Everything seemed normal, convoys passing through, standard traffic, routine reports. But he couldn't stop thinking about Agent 241's briefing. 10,000 years old. Underground structures, 67 affected personnel. He started paying closer attention to the little things. The way shadows fell at certain times of day, the slight variations in convoy transit times, the occasional radio static that lasted just a bit too long. And he started noticing something he'd never consciously registered before. The depot's roads didn't quite make sense. There were curves in places where the terrain was flat. Straight sections that suddenly bent for no apparent reason. Access roads that led to bunkers in inefficient patterns. He'd always assumed it was poor planning or construction constraints. But now he wondered if the roads had been deliberately routed to avoid certain areas, to minimize traffic over specific underground locations. On his 7th day back at the observation post, he saw something. A convoy was passing through at 15:22 hours. Standard ammunition transport, 4 vehicles. They were approaching the curve near Bunker Complex 18 when Cole noticed the light changing again. That same flattening effect, shadows disappearing. He grabbed his radio to report it, but before he could transmit, everything snapped back to normal. He checked his stopwatch. This time, only 7 seconds had passed. 7 seconds, not 23. The phenomenon was shortening. Or practicing. Cole called Agent 21's number. She answered on the first ring. What did you see? He described it. She was silent for a moment, then, It's accelerating. The cycle is shortening. That's not a good sign. What does it mean? It means the phenomenon is building toward something. A peak activity period. We've never observed a full cycle. Every time we got close, the depot shut down operations in that sector and the phenomenon went dormant before reaching its maximum. But this time, you're not shutting it down. We can't. The depot handles too much critical infrastructure. Shutting down the southern sector would impact ammunition supply for half the western United States. The Pentagon won't authorize it without definitive proof of threat. People losing time isn't proof enough, not compared to the strategic importance of the depot. Welcome to national security decision-making, Mr. Brennan. Over the next 10 days, Cole documented 11 more temporal anomalies, each one shorter than the last. 23 seconds, 7 seconds, 3 seconds, 1 second. Whatever was happening, it was ramping up in frequency while decreasing in duration. On June 29th, 17 days after the convoy's missing 23 seconds, Cole was at his observation post when the depot's emergency alarm sounded. Not the routine test alarm, the real thing. 3 sharp blasts followed by continuous tone. His radio crackled. "All units, this is operations. We have a security situation in Zone 12, Southern Sector. All non-essential personnel evacuate to designated safe zones. Repeat, this is not a drill." Cole grabbed his binoculars and looked toward Zone 12. At first, he didn't see anything unusual. Then the ground began to glow. Not spots or circles this time. The entire area, at least a square mile, was radiating pale blue light from beneath the surface. The bunkers, the roads, the empty desert, all of it glowing like it had been painted with luminescent paint, and the air above it was changing. Cole could see distortions, like heat shimmer, but more extreme. The light was bending, creating prismatic effects, breaking into impossible colors. And in the center of it all, directly above Bunker Complex 18, the air was tearing. A vertical line appeared, about 30 feet tall, impossibly thin and dark. As Cole watched through his binoculars, the line widened into a gap. Not an opening, a gap in reality itself, showing something behind or beyond the normal world. Through that gap, he could see movement. Shapes that didn't make sense, geometries that his brain couldn't process, and light, brilliant, colorless light that hurt to look at but that he couldn't look away from. His radio was screaming with multiple voices, everyone trying to report at once. Cole added his voice to the chaos. "Operations, this is Delta. I have visual on Zone 12. There's some kind of spatial anomaly, approximately 30 feet in height, centered on Complex 18. Something is coming through." Delta, operations copies. Maintain your position and continue observation. Do not approach. Repeat, do not approach. The gap widened. Cole could see more clearly now what was behind it. It looked like a vast chamber or cavity, illuminated by that strange, colorless light. And inside that chamber, he could see machinery. Impossible machinery, all angles and surfaces that seemed to fold in on themselves, operating in dimensions that shouldn't exist. And he saw something else. Something that made his breath catch. People. They were inside that chamber, standing near the machinery. Dozens of them, maybe more. All frozen in place, not moving, just standing like mannequins. Cole adjusted his binoculars, trying to get a clearer look at their faces. He recognized one of them. It was Johnson, Private First Class Johnson, who'd been taken to a secure facility for observation, who supposedly had no memory of the lights. But here he was, standing in that impossible chamber, eyes open, staring at nothing. And next to him was James Dalton, the truck driver who'd reported being lifted into the air months ago. And next to him was a woman Cole didn't recognize, but who wore a depot security uniform that looked decades out of date. They were all there. Everyone who'd ever lost time at Hawthorne. standing in that chamber. Not missing, not hidden, just displaced, stored, kept. The gap began to close. "No!" Cole screamed into the radio. "They're in there! The missing personnel are inside! We have to—" The gap sealed shut. The glow faded from the ground. The distortions in the air smoothed out. Within 30 seconds, Zone 12 looked completely normal again, as if nothing had happened. Cole sat in his observation post, shaking. He'd seen them. They were alive. But where were they? In some underground facility? In another dimension? In some kind of temporal stasis? Agent 241 arrived at the observation post 40 minutes later. "I saw your report. Tell me everything." Cole did, every detail. When he finished, she was silent for a long time, staring out over the depot. "We've suspected for years that the missing time wasn't just deleted memory, that the consciousness had to go somewhere during those missing minutes or seconds. Now we know." She turned to look at him. "They're being kept, collected. We don't know why, and we don't know if they're experiencing anything during that time, but they're not gone. They're being preserved somehow in whatever facility exists beneath this depot. We have to get them back. How? We can't even access that space when it's closed, and when it opens, it stays open for less than a minute. Not enough time to mount a rescue operation. Then we force it to stay open longer. Whatever triggers the opening, we amplify it." Agent 241 shook her head. "That's extremely dangerous. We don't know what would happen if we destabilize the phenomenon. It could collapse entirely, potentially trapping those people permanently. Or it could expand, taking more people. So we just leave them there? We document, we study, we wait for another opportunity. That's all we can do." But Cole knew that wasn't all he could do. He had seen them. He knew they were alive, and he wasn't going to let them remain trapped in whatever that chamber was, frozen in time, collected like specimens. He made a decision. He was going back to Bunker Complex 18, and he was going to find a way to bring them home, even if it meant becoming one of the collected himself. Agent 241 left the observation post at 1930, taking her documentation and recordings. She'd given Cole explicit orders: return to normal duty, report any anomalies, do not attempt independent investigation. Standard protocol. Cover your ass bureaucracy. Cole waited until 22'd. Full darkness. Minimal depot activity. He knew the patrol schedules by heart. There was a 90-minute gap between security sweeps in Zone 12 from 22 and to 23:30. More than enough time if he moved fast. He left his truck at the observation post and went on foot. Easier to hide, easier to move quietly. He carried only essentials: flashlight, radio on standby, his phone with the camera recording. If something happened to him, at least there'd be evidence. The walk to Bunker Complex 18 took 23 minutes. He chose that timing deliberately. 23 minutes to reach the place where 23 seconds had disappeared. Some part of him wondered if the symmetry meant something, if the phenomenon operated on numerical patterns that he could learn to predict. The complex looked abandoned in the darkness. The bunkers were dark, concrete mounds against the starlit sky. Access doors sealed, no signs of life. Cole stood on the road where the convoy had passed, where his cameras had jumped, where 6 drivers had lost a piece of their consciousness. He closed his eyes and tried to feel it. The wrongness that everyone had described. The sense that reality was thinner here, that the boundary between what was and what shouldn't be had worn dangerously transparent. At first, nothing. Just desert silence and his own heartbeat. Then he felt it. A vibration, so low he couldn't hear it, but his bones registered it, coming from beneath his feet. Like standing on top of a massive engine that was slowly warming up. Cole opened his eyes. The ground was beginning to glow. Faint at first, barely visible. Pale blue light seeping up through microscopic cracks in the asphalt. He'd seen this before, during the survey. This was how it started. He pulled out his phone, made sure the camera was recording, and began narrating in a low voice. June 29th, 22:23 hours. I'm at Bunker Complex 18. The luminescence has begun. Ground temperature feels normal. No unusual heat or cold. The vibration is subsonic, approximately. His radio crackled to life. Not a voice. Static that sounded almost like breathing. In, out, in, out. The same rhythm everyone had reported. The circles of light appeared. Not scattered randomly this time. They formed a pattern, a perfect geometric array, each circle precisely equidistant from its neighbors, creating a grid that extended for several hundred feet in all directions. Cole was standing in the center of it. He should run. Every survival instinct screamed at him to get out, to evacuate before the phenomenon peaked. But he stayed, because running wouldn't help the people trapped in that chamber. Running wouldn't bring Johnson back, or Dalton, or the dozens of others who'd been collected over 43 years. The vibration intensified. Cole's vision began to blur at the edges. The air was doing that shimmer effect again, but stronger now. He could see multiple layers of reality overlapping. The normal desert, and beneath it, something else. Geometric structures, corridors, machinery that defied description. And then the tear appeared, not directly in front of him this time. It opened about 30 feet to his left, slicing vertically through the air. That same impossible darkness, showing the chamber beyond. Cole could see the machinery again, vast and intricate, operating on principles that human engineering had never conceived. And he could see the people, all of them, standing in neat rows like an archive of missing time. Their eyes were open but unseeing, not dead, not asleep, just absent. Cole walked toward the Tayar. Each step was harder than the last, like moving through water. The air resisted him, pushed back, tried to keep him away, but he forced himself forward. 20 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. He could see Johnson clearly now. The private's face was slack, empty, but his chest was rising and falling. He was breathing, alive, just not present in his own body. "Johnson!" Cole shouted. "Can you hear me?" No response. None of them responded. They just stood there, preserved in whatever state the phenomenon had caught them in. The vibration suddenly spiked. Cole stumbled, nearly fell. The tear was widening, the chamber becoming more visible. And now he could see something else. Movement in the deeper sections of the chamber, far beyond where the collected people stood. Something was coming. It emerged from the geometric shadows, and Cole's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. It wasn't a creature, wasn't a machine. It was both and neither. A configuration of angles and surfaces that moved like biology but functioned like technology. Multiple appendages but not arms or legs. Sensory organs but not eyes or ears. It was examining the collected people, moving from one to another, pausing briefly at each one as if checking their status. This was the collector, the curator, whatever intelligence operated this facility. It noticed Cole. He felt its attention like a physical weight pressing against his consciousness. It moved toward the tear, toward him, studying him with the same clinical detachment it had shown the others. Cole forced himself to speak. "I want them back, Johnson, Dalton, all of them. They don't belong to you." The entity didn't respond, couldn't respond, maybe. Cole didn't know if it understood language or communication as humans knew it. But it stopped moving. It was considering. Cole's phone was still recording. His hand was shaking, making the image jump, but the camera was pointed at the entity. Evidence, proof. Whatever happened next, this footage would exist. The entity moved closer to the tear. One of its appendages extended through the opening, crossing into Cole's reality. Where it intersected with normal space, the air distorted, created ripples like stone thrown into water. It was reaching for him. Cole had a choice. Let it take him, join the collected, become another specimen in the archive, or run, try to escape, save himself and abandon the others. He thought about Johnson, frozen in that chamber, lost to everyone who knew him. He thought about Dalton, about Rodriguez, about all the others whose missing time had become missing existence. He thought about the next person who would lose 23 seconds, then 23 minutes, then 23 hours, as the phenomenon escalated. Someone had to stop it. Someone had to make it stop collecting. Cole stepped forward, into the reach of that impossible appendage, and he felt it touch him. The sensation was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Not painful, not even unpleasant, just utterly alien. Like every atom in his body was being cataloged, analyzed, recorded. He could feel his consciousness being scanned, his memories being read like data files. And then, for just a moment, he made contact. Not physical contact, mental contact. He felt the entity's awareness brush against his own, and in that instant of connection he understood. This wasn't an invasion. It wasn't hostile. The entity wasn't collecting people out of malice or curiosity. It was trying to preserve them, to save them. From what? Cole pushed the question through the connection. What are you saving them from? The answer came as images, as concepts that his brain had to translate into human understanding. He saw time as a structure, a framework, and he saw that framework failing, collapsing, timelines fragmenting, realities splitting, causality breaking down. The phenomenon beneath Hawthorne wasn't causing the temporal distortions. It was trying to prevent them. Every person it collected was a person saved from temporal dissolution, pulled out of the failing timeline and preserved in a stable pocket of reality. The missing time wasn't stolen. It was the cost of salvation. Cole reeled from the revelation. Are we dying? Is our reality ending? Not yet. Not for a long time by human measures, but inevitable. And this entity, this curator, was trying to save what it could before the collapse. Preserving specimens of consciousness, storing them in stable temporal zones where they could exist beyond the death of their native timeline. But Johnson and the others, they're not really living. They're just preserved. Cole felt anger rising through the connection. That's not saving them, that's collecting corpses. The entity paused, reconsidered. Cole could feel it processing, adapting its understanding based on his input. It hadn't realized that humans valued conscious experience over mere existence. That being alive meant more than just biological function. Can you restore them? Cole asked. Can you put them back? Another pause. Then, slowly, the entity withdrew its appendage from Cole. It moved back through the tier into the chamber. Cole watched as it approached Johnson. It touched the private, and Johnson's eyes suddenly focused. He gasped, like someone surfacing from underwater, and looked around in confusion and terror. The entity moved to Dalton. Same result. Then to the woman in the old uniform. One by one, it restored consciousness to the collected people. They began moving, speaking, panicking as they realized where they were. The entity returned to the tear and looked at Cole. He felt another surge of communication. They can return. But they will be vulnerable to the timeline's decay. They will continue toward dissolution. Is that what you want? Yes, Cole answered. Let them live their lives. Let them choose their own fate. That's what it means to be human. The entity seemed to consider this. Then, slowly, the people in the chamber began moving toward the tier. Johnson came first, stepping through the opening and stumbling onto the Nevada desert floor. Dalton followed. Then the others, one after another, emerging from the temporal pocket into normal reality. They were disoriented, confused, terrified, but they were conscious. They were alive. The last one through was an elderly man in a military uniform from the 1970s. He looked at Cole with hollow eyes, trying to understand what had happened to him. "How long?" he whispered. "How long was I in there?" Cole couldn't answer, because he didn't know. Time might have passed differently in that chamber. The man could have experienced hours, or no time at all. The tier began to close. Cole felt one final communication from the entity. "You have shown me a different value system. I will recalibrate my preservation protocols. But understand, when your timeline fails, I cannot save you all. Only those who are willing to surrender consciousness for existence." The tier sealed. The blue light faded from the ground. The vibration stopped. Zone 12 returned to normal desert silence. Cole was surrounded by 23 confused, terrified people who'd just been pulled out of temporal stasis. His radio was suddenly screaming with multiple voices. Security had seen the phenomenon from observation posts, were converging on Complex 18, would arrive within minutes. He looked at Johnson, at Dalton, at all the others. "You're safe now," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "You're back." Agent 241 arrived with a full security team at 2258. She took one look at the assembled group of returned personnel, some missing for hours, some for months, one apparently missing for decades, and her professional composure cracked for just a moment. "What did you do?" she asked Cole. "I asked," he said simply, and it listened. The debriefing lasted 3 days. Cole told them everything, showed them his phone footage, though most of it was corrupted by electromagnetic interference. Enough remained to verify his account. The returned personnel were examined, interviewed, given medical and psychological evaluation. All of them were physically healthy, but their memories of the time in the chamber were fragmentary at best, like trying to remember a dream after waking. Johnson recalled standing in light, feeling nothing. Dalton remembered seeing machinery but couldn't describe it. The elderly man from 1976 couldn't remember anything at all. His last clear memory was driving a convoy through the depot 43 years ago. Agent 241 pulled Cole aside on the 3rd day. "The phenomenon has gone dormant. Whatever you did, whatever agreement you reached with it seems to have stopped the collection cycle. For now," Cole said. "But it's still down there, still waiting. And it told me that our timeline is failing, that eventually, reality as we know it will collapse." Did it say when? No, could be centuries, could be millennia, but it's inevitable. Cole looked out over the depot, at the bunkers and roads, and all the ordinary infrastructure of military logistics. It was trying to save us. In its own way. It just didn't understand that humans value the quality of existence more than mere survival. Do you think it will try again? I think it will keep watching. And if the timeline really does start collapsing, if it can prove that preservation is better than dissolution, then yes, it will try again. And maybe next time people will choose to be collected, to be preserved, to trade consciousness for existence. Agent 241 was silent for a long moment. "That's above my pay grade, Brennan, way above." "Mine too," Cole said. "But I had to try. I couldn't leave them in there." "You saved 23 people, at considerable risk to yourself." She paused. "The depot's official position is that this was a mass hallucination caused by unexplained environmental factors. All personnel have been treated for potential exposure and cleared to return to duty. This incident will be classified, buried, forgotten. Like all the others. Like all the others, she confirmed. You should know your contract is being terminated, not as punishment, but because you've seen too much. You can't continue working here with this knowledge. Cole nodded. He'd expected that. What about the returned personnel, Johnson, Dalton, the others? They'll be reassigned, monitored, but allowed to continue their lives. The man from 1976, his name is Frank Garrison, by the way, is being reunited with his family. They thought he was dead. They're not sure this is real. Is it? Agent 241 looked at him sharply. What do you mean? The entity controls temporal pockets. It can preserve people outside normal time. How do we know this isn't just another preservation? How do we know we're really back in the primary timeline and not in some stable pocket it created to satisfy my demand? The agent's expression changed. Fear flickered across it, quickly suppressed. That's not a helpful line of inquiry, Brennan. But it's the right question, isn't it? She didn't answer, because she couldn't. Because none of them could really be sure. Cole left Hawthorne Army Depot on July 4th, 2019. Independence Day. He drove north toward Reno, watching the depot shrink in his rearview mirror. Somewhere beneath those bunkers, beneath those roads, was something ancient and patient and utterly incomprehensible. Something that had tried to save humanity in the only way it understood. And someday, when the timeline really did begin to fail, it would try again. And maybe next time, humanity would say yes. Cole checked his watch. 14:51:48. He'd been driving for 23 minutes, or had he? Dustin Karev had been working maintenance at Hawthorne Army Depot for 9 years, and he'd learned to trust his equipment. When a torque wrench said a bolt was tightened to spec, it was. When a multimeter showed 0 voltage, you could touch the wire. When a jackhammer wouldn't start, you didn't waste time troubleshooting. You grabbed a different one. So when Rhett's excavator died in the middle of digging a drainage trench on July 15, 2019, Dustin's first instinct wasn't to panic. Equipment failed. That's why they carried spare parts, backup tools, redundant systems. They were working in Zone 9, about 2 miles north of the main depot complex, installing a new drainage system for one of the older bunker clusters. Night work. The desert heat made daytime construction brutal in July, so they ran crews from 20 on to 04 when temperatures were manageable. Dustin's crew consisted of 5 people. Himself as the lead maintenance supervisor, Rhett Morrison operating the excavator, Paula Sanchez and Marcus Green handling the concrete forms, and Danny Yates running the support truck. The work was straightforward. Dig trenches, lay pipe, pour concrete, backfill. They'd done it 100 times at 100 different locations across the depot. Boring, repetitive work, which is exactly how Dustin liked it. Boring meant safe. Boring meant predictable. They'd been working for about 3 hours when Rhett's excavator suddenly went quiet. Not a gradual power down, it just stopped, engine cutting off mid-cycle. The bucket suspended in midair with a load of dirt. Dustin looked up from the pipe section he was measuring. Rhett? What's wrong? No answer. Rhett was sitting in the operator's cabin, not moving, staring at something in the sky. Rhett, Dustin called it again. Paula noticed too. Is he okay? Dustin walked over to the excavator and climbed up to the cabin. Rhett was gripping the controls, knuckles white, eyes fixed on something above and to the west. Dustin followed his gaze. There was a light in the sky. Single point of brightness, white and steady, maybe a few 100 feet up. Could have been a helicopter, except there was no sound. Could have been a drone, except it wasn't moving. It just hung there, perfectly still, like someone had photoshopped a star into the wrong part of the sky. "Rhett, you see that?" Dustin asked. "Yeah." Rhett's voice was tight. "Yeah, I see it. What is it?" "Don't know. Could be..." The light split. Not gradually. Not like something breaking apart. One moment it was a single point of light. The next moment it was 3 points, arranged in a perfect equilateral triangle. Each point was identical in brightness and color, and they were all perfectly still. Dustin felt his skin prickle. "Okay, that's not normal. Should we call it in?" Rhett still hadn't moved his eyes from the lights. Yeah, we should." Dustin climbed down from the excavator and grabbed his radio. "Central, this is Maintenance 4. We've got an unidentified aerial phenomenon in Zone 9, approximately 300 feet altitude, bearing..." He checked his compass. "270 degrees. 3 distinct light sources in triangular formation. Requesting identification. Over." Static answered him. Not the usual background hiss, this was louder, more aggressive, with an underlying rhythm that made Dustin think of breathing. He tried again. "Central, this is Maintenance 4. Do you copy?" Over. More static. And underneath it, barely audible, what sounded like voices. Not words, just the cadence of human speech, but distorted, slowed down until it was unrecognizable. "Radio's dead," Paula said. She'd been trying her own handheld unit. "I'm getting nothing but interference." Marcus had his phone out. "No signal. I had full bars 2 minutes ago." Danny was standing by the support truck, staring at the lights. "Guys, they're moving." The 3 points of light were descending, slowly, smoothly, maintaining their perfect triangular formation. As they got closer, Dustin could see they weren't just points. They were spheres, each maybe 3 feet in diameter, glowing with that same steady white light. No visible source, no housing or structure, just spheres of light, floating down from the sky like they were on invisible wires. They stopped about 50 feet above the ground, directly over the trench Rhett had been digging. "What do we do?" Paula's voice was shaking slightly. Dustin's training said evacuate. Get everyone away from an unknown hazard. But his curiosity, that stupid, dangerous curiosity that had gotten him in trouble more than once, wanted to stay, wanted to understand what he was seeing. "Everyone back to the truck," he said. "Slowly. Don't run. Just walk normally and get in the truck." They moved as a group, keeping their eyes on the lights. Dustin was about to follow when he heard a sound that made him freeze. The excavator's engine was starting. He turned. The machine was sitting there, engine running, but nobody was in the operator's cabin. The controls were moving on their own, the bucket lifting, rotating, dumping its load of dirt, then scooping another load, operating itself with perfect precision. "Jesus Christ," Rhett whispered. "I turned that off. I know I turned it off." The 3 spheres of light began rotating around a central point, maintaining their triangular formation but spinning like a mobile. As they spun, the excavator worked faster. Bucket up, rotate, dump, bucket down, scoop, lift. The movements were impossibly quick, far faster than any human operator could manage. And the trench was getting deeper. "It's digging for something," Marcus said. "It's looking for something. We need to go now." Dustin grabbed Paula's arm and started pulling her toward the truck. "Everyone in the truck, we're leaving." They ran. No more pretense of calm evacuation. This had crossed over into genuine emergency. Dustin reached the truck first and yanked the driver's door open. The key was in the ignition. He turned it. Nothing happened. No engine turnover. No clicking. No dashboard lights. The truck was completely dead, just like the radio, just like the phones. "Try it again!" Danny was shouting. Dustin tried. Same result. The truck was dead weight, 4,000 pounds of useless metal. Behind them, the excavator was still digging. The trench was now at least 10 feet deep, far deeper than their drainage work required. And as Dustin watched, the bucket struck something solid. Metal scraping against metal. A sound that echoed across the empty desert. The excavator stopped. The engine cut off. The 3 spheres of light stopped rotating and moved down into the trench, disappearing below ground level. For a long moment, nothing happened. The 5 maintenance workers stood by the dead truck, staring at the trench, waiting. Dustin's heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. His mouth was dry. His hands were shaking. Then the lights came back up. But they weren't 3 separate spheres anymore. They had merged back into a single point, just like at the beginning. And that single point of light rose straight up into the sky, accelerating impossibly fast, and vanished. The silence that followed was profound. No wind, no animal sounds, just 5 people breathing hard in the Nevada night. Danny was the first to speak. Did that really just happen? Everyone okay? Dustin did a quick head count. All 5 present and accounted for. Anyone hurt? Anyone feel weird? Define weird, Paula said. Because I feel like I just watched physics take the night off. Dustin walked towards the trench. Slowly. Carefully. The others followed, staying close together. When they reached the edge, Dustin grabbed a work light from his belt and shined it down. The trench was now 15 feet deep. At the bottom, partially exposed by the excavator's work, was something metallic. Not a pipe, not a utility conduit, not anything that should have been buried there. It was a perfect sphere, maybe 8 feet in diameter, smooth surface, no visible seams or markings, made of some kind of metal that didn't reflect light the way it should. The beam from Dustin's flashlight seemed to be absorbed rather than bounced back. What the hell is that? Rhett had climbed down from the excavator and joined them at the edge. I don't know, but we didn't put it there. Should we report it? Dustin tried his radio again. This time it worked. Central, this is Maintenance 4. We have a situation in Zone 9. Unknown object discovered during excavation. Requesting immediate supervisor response and security. Over. Maintenance 4, Central copies. What type of unknown object? Over. Metallic sphere, approximately 8 feet diameter. Buried approximately 15 feet below surface. No identifying marks. No obvious function. Requesting, he paused. Should he mention the lights, the self-operating excavator, the dead electronics? Requesting full investigation team. Over. Copy Maintenance 4, hold your position, supervisor and security en route. ETA 20 minutes, over. They waited by the trench, none of them speaking much. Dustin kept his flashlight trained on the sphere, studying it. The surface wasn't completely smooth. Now that his eyes had adjusted, he could see faint patterns etched into the metal. Geometric designs, mathematical symbols maybe, or something that looked like mathematics but wasn't quite right. Paula crouched at the edge of the trench. How old do you think it is? No idea. I mean, we've been working at this depot for years. Someone would have found this by now if it was recent. This has to have been here for a long time. Marcus had his phone out, trying to take pictures. My camera won't focus on it. Look. He showed Dustin the screen. The images were all blurred, distorted, like the sphere was vibrating at high frequency, even though it looked perfectly still to the naked eye. Electromagnetic interference, Dustin suggested. Whatever that thing is made of, it's playing havoc with electronics. But the radios are working now. They're working because the lights are gone. Whatever was controlling them, he stopped. Was that really what he believed? That the lights had been controlling their equipment? That sounded insane. But what other explanation was there? The supervisor arrived at 2247, accompanied by 2 security vehicles. Laura Vickers was the night operations supervisor, a former Air Force logistics officer who'd been working at Hawthorne for 6 years. She took one look at the trench and immediately called for a full investigation team. "Nobody goes near that sphere until we know what it is," she ordered. "And nobody talks about this. Not to other crews, not to family, not to anyone. This is a potential security incident until proven otherwise." "Ma'am," Dustin said, "there's something else you should know. Before we found the sphere, there were lights, 3 of them hovering above this exact spot. He hesitated. How crazy was this going to sound? They seemed to be controlling the excavator, making it dig, like they were looking for this thing." Vickers' expression didn't change. "Did anyone else see these lights?" All 5 crew members raised their hands. "Did anyone get video or photos?" Marcus showed her his phone. "Tried, but the camera wouldn't focus. Everything came out distorted." Vickers took the phone, looked at the images, and handed it back. "I need all of you to write detailed reports. Everything you saw, everything you experienced, exact times if you can remember them. And I need you to understand that this information is now classified. You sign NDAs, you keep this to yourselves, or you find new jobs. Clear?" They nodded. They'd all signed security clearances when they started working at the depot. They knew the drill. The investigation team arrived at 2315. They set up lights around the trench, lowered sensors and cameras, took measurements and samples. Dustin and his crew were kept back at a safe distance, watching the professionals work. Dr. Kenneth Ashford was the lead investigator, a civilian scientist who worked for some government agency Dustin had never heard of. He spent 15 minutes studying the sphere from above, then another 30 minutes reviewing the sensor data. When he finally climbed out of the trench, his expression was grim. "This is beyond my clearance level," he said to Vickers. "I need to make some calls. Nobody touches anything until I get authorization." "What is it?" Vickers asked. "I don't know. But it's not ours. It's not Russian. It's not Chinese. And unless there's a civilization we don't know about, it's not human." They cordoned off the entire area. Yellow tape, security barriers, armed guards posted at 50-meter intervals. By midnight, Zone 9 had been declared a restricted access site, and everyone who'd been there during the discovery was confined to the depot's secure facility for debriefing. Dustin sat in an interview room for 3 hours, going over every detail with 2 men who didn't introduce themselves beyond Agent Morrison and Der Ellis. They wanted to know everything, what he'd seen, what he'd heard, what he'd felt. They asked the same questions multiple times, phrasing them differently, checking for inconsistencies. "Tell me again about when the excavator started moving on its own," Agent Morrison said. "I already told you 4 times. Tell me a 5th time. Details matter." Dustin sighed and went through it again. The engine starting by itself, the controls moving with no operator, the impossibly fast, precise movements, the way the bucket had struck the sphere with that distinctive metallic clang. "Did you hear any other sounds during this period? Any humming, buzzing, voices?" "Just the excavator and the radio static, but I told you about that." "Describe the static again." "It was loud, aggressive, with a rhythm underneath it, like breathing. And I thought I heard voices, but I couldn't make out words." Dr. Ellis leaned forward. "Did the voices sound human?" "I don't know, maybe. They had the pattern of human speech, rhythm, cadence, but slowed down, distorted." "Could it have been a language you don't speak?" "Could have been anything. I only heard it for a few seconds." They kept him until 03:30, then escorted him to temporary quarters in the administration building. He was told to get some sleep, that someone would collect him at 08 and Kai. For further debriefing, don't call anyone. Don't use the internet. Don't talk to the other crew members. Dustin lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep was impossible. His mind kept replaying the events, the lights splitting, the excavator digging, the sphere emerging from 15 feet of Nevada desert. What was it doing there? How long had it been buried? And why had those lights come looking for it tonight? After how many years? Decades? Centuries? He must have fallen asleep eventually because someone was shaking him awake. He looked at the clock. 07:55. Get dressed, the security officer said. They're excavating the sphere. You're required to observe. They drove him back to Zone 9 in a security vehicle. The site had been transformed overnight. Portable lights on stands illuminated the area like a movie set. A crane had been brought in. Technical crews were everywhere, setting up equipment, running cables, establishing a perimeter. The trench had been widened and deepened. Dustin could now see that the sphere wasn't sitting on the ground. It was partially embedded in something else, a larger structure. The excavation had revealed the top of what looked like a massive metal plate, at least 30 feet across, with the sphere mounted or attached to its surface. Dr. Ashford saw Dustin arrive and walked over. Mr. Karev, thank you for returning. I need you to identify something. He led Dustin to a monitoring station where multiple screens showed different views of the sphere and the plate beneath it. One screen displayed what looked like a 3D reconstruction based on ground-penetrating radar. This is what we're dealing with, Ashford said, pointing to the reconstruction. The sphere is the visible part, but underground there's an extensive structure. It appears to be a facility of some kind. Multiple chambers, corridors, at least 3 levels, buried approximately 30 feet below the surface. Dustin stared at the image. That's impossible. We've been working at this depot for 9 years. Someone would have found this. You'd think so, but ground-penetrating radar doesn't work well in this soil. Too much mineral content. And metal detectors would have picked up all the munitions in the area, masking anything else. This facility was effectively invisible using standard survey techniques. So, how did the lights know it was here? Excellent question. One we don't have an answer for. Ashford pulled up another screen. This is what I need you to identify. We found these markings on the excavator's bucket. The screen showed close-up photos of the excavator's metal surface. There were symbols etched into the steel, the same geometric patterns Dustin had seen on the sphere. Perfect lines, mathematical precision, as if someone had used a laser engraver while the excavator was digging. Those weren't there before, Dustin said. I maintain that equipment. I would have noticed. That's what I thought. These marks are fresh. You can see where they've cut through the rust and dirt. They were made tonight during the excavation, but we have no idea how or by what. The lights did it when they were controlling the excavator. Ashford nodded slowly. That's our working theory. The phenomenon, whatever it was capable of manipulating physical matter with extreme precision while operating mechanical equipment. That suggests either advanced technology or... He trailed off. Or what? Or something that doesn't quite fit our understanding of what's possible. They spent the next 6 hours carefully excavating around the sphere and the plate. The crane was used to lift sections of dirt and rock, while technicians worked by hand near the metal surfaces, using brushes and small tools like archaeologists at a dig site. By 14 Hunquag, they'd exposed the full extent of the plate. It was circular, 43 feet in diameter, made of the same non-reflective metal as the sphere. The sphere sat in the exact center, mounted on what looked like a raised platform, and around the edge of the plate were more symbols, thousands of them, arranged in concentric rings. "It's a door," Dr. Ellis said suddenly. He'd been studying the symbols through high-powered binoculars. "Or a hatch. Look at the patterns. They repeat every 90 degrees. That's a locking mechanism." "How do you know?" Vickers asked. "Because I've seen something similar before, different location, different circumstances, but the basic design is the same. There's a facility underneath this. The question is whether we want to open it." Agent Morrison joined the conversation. "We don't have a choice. If this is what I think it is, we need to document everything inside before we seal it. And if opening it triggers something, then we deal with it. But we can't leave an unknown installation sitting under an active ammunition depot. The security implications alone, I'm more concerned about the safety implications," Ashford interrupted. "Those lights demonstrated the ability to control our equipment remotely. If there's more of that technology inside the facility, opening it could be extremely dangerous." They argued for another 30 minutes before finally reaching a decision. They would attempt to open the hatch, but only after establishing extensive safety protocols and evacuation procedures. And they would do it at night, when depot operations were minimal, to reduce the number of personnel at risk. Dustin was told to return to temporary quarters and wait. More debriefing would follow. More questions. More NDAs to sign. But as he was being led away, he looked back at the excavation site. The sphere sat in the center of the exposed plate, catching the afternoon sun. And for just a moment, so brief he almost thought he imagined it, the sphere pulsed. A single flash of light, white and bright. Nobody else seemed to have noticed. The technicians kept working. The security guards kept watching. The scientists kept debating. But Dustin had seen it. And he knew with absolute certainty that whatever was inside that facility was aware of them, watching them, waiting. They assembled the entry team at 22 odd. 8 people. Agent Morrison and Dr. Ellis from the investigation team. Dr. Ashford as the scientific lead. 2 security specialists named Rivers and Costa. A structural engineer named Yao. A communications technician named Foster. And, surprisingly, Dustin. "Why me?" Dustin had asked when he was informed he'd be part of the team. "Because you were there when it started," Morrison said. "You saw the lights. You experienced the phenomenon firsthand. If something similar happens inside the facility, you might recognize it before the rest of us do. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. This is a volunteer assignment, Mr. Karev. You can decline if you want." Dustin thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. He could walk away, let the professionals handle it, go back to his normal life of fixing generators and replacing hydraulic lines. Safe, predictable, boring. Or he could go down into whatever was waiting beneath Zone 9. "I'm in," he said. They spent 2 hours reviewing the entry plan. The hatch had been opened using a combination of mechanical leverage and what Dr. Ellis called resonance frequency activation. Essentially, playing specific sound frequencies at the locking mechanism until something clicked. Beneath the hatch was a vertical shaft, approximately 6 feet in diameter, descending at least 40 feet before leveling off into horizontal corridors. "We don't know what the atmosphere is like down there," Ashford warned. "Could be toxic, could be inert gas. We're all wearing hazmat suits with independent air supplies. Do not remove your helmet under any circumstances. Do not touch anything unless I explicitly authorize it. Stay in visual contact with at least one other team member at all times." They suited up and approached the hatch at 2347. Portable lights had been rigged around the opening, pointing down into the shaft. Dustin looked down and saw metal rungs set into the wall, a ladder, descending into darkness. Rivers went first, being the most experienced in tactical entry. Then Costa, then Ashford, Ellis, Morrison, Yao, Foster, and finally Dustin. The latter was solid, well-maintained despite its apparent age. The metal was cool under his gloved hands, and he could feel the rungs vibrating slightly. A deep, subsonic hum that resonated through the structure. The descent took 5 minutes. When Dustin reached the bottom, he found himself in a circular chamber about 20 feet in diameter. The walls were the same non-reflective metal as the sphere and plate above. The floor was perfectly level, and around the perimeter were 6 doorways, all identical, all leading to dark corridors that branched off in different directions. "Radio check," Morrison said. His voice came through Dustin's helmet speaker with perfect clarity. "Everyone confirm." They went around the circle. All 8 team members checked in. Communications were working, at least for now. Ashford pulled out a device that looked like a modified tablet computer. Atmospheric scan shows breathable air with normal oxygen levels. Temperature is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity near 0. No radiation above background. No biological agents detected. "Any electromagnetic anomalies?" Ellis asked. "That's the weird part. EM readings are completely flat. 0 electromagnetic activity. Like we're inside a Faraday cage, but more absolute. I'm not even getting radio interference from our own equipment." Rivers stepped toward one of the doorways and shined his light down the corridor. "These passages all look identical. How do we know which way to go?" "We map as we go," Yao said. She was already setting up a portable survey station. "I'll maintain position here at the entrance, establish a baseline, and guide you through the facility. Everyone needs to wear these." She distributed small beacon devices that attached to their suits. "I can track your positions relative to the entrance. Don't go anywhere without a beacon." They chose the corridor directly opposite the ladder. Arbitrary decision, but they had to start somewhere. Rivers led the way, with Costa 5 feet behind, then the others in single file. The corridor was 8 feet wide and perfectly straight, extending beyond the range of their lights. As they walked, Dustin noticed something odd about the walls. They weren't smooth. Up close, he could see incredibly fine patterns, almost like circuitry, etched into the metal. The patterns seemed to shift in his peripheral vision, rearranging themselves. But when he looked directly at them, they were static. "Is anyone else seeing the walls move?" he asked. "Confirmed," Ellis said. "Optical illusion caused by the pattern density. Your brain is trying to process too much information at once." They walked for 3 minutes before reaching the first junction. The corridor split into a Y formation, both branches curving away into darkness. "Taking right branch," Rivers announced. They proceeded down the right corridor for another 2 minutes before finding a door. It wasn't like the doorways they'd passed through earlier. This was an actual door. A circular hatch similar to the one on the surface, but smaller, maybe 4 feet in diameter. And in the center of the door was a handprint. Not carved, not etched. Molded into the metal, as if someone had pressed their hand into soft clay, and it had hardened. A human-sized hand with 5 fingers. "Is that?" Foster's voice trailed off. "It's a handprint," Ashford confirmed. "Approximately the same size as an adult human hand, which raises some interesting questions about who built this facility. Or what they wanted us to think," Morrison said. "Could be deliberate misdirection." Dr. Ellis approached the door and carefully scanned the handprint with his equipment. No biological residue. The print is part of the metal structure. It was formed during manufacturing, not added later. This is intentional design. "Access mechanism?" Yao suggested from her position at the entrance, her voice coming through their helmet radios. "Only one way to find out." Ellis looked at Morrison, who nodded. Ellis placed his gloved hand over the print. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door began to glow. Faint at first, but rapidly brightening, the metal turning from dull gray to pale blue. The glow spread from the handprint outward, following lines in the metal that Dustin hadn't noticed before. Circuitry, maybe, or something like it. The lines traced complex patterns across the door's surface, all converging at the center. The door started to open. Not sliding or swinging, the metal was liquefying, flowing away from the center like water running down a drain. Within seconds, the circular hatch had completely dissolved, leaving a dark opening beyond. What the hell? Costa had his weapon raised, though Dustin wasn't sure what good a firearm would do against liquefying metal. "No one panic," Morrison ordered. "Ashford, analysis? The metal appears to have transitioned to a non-solid state. Possibly a form of programmed matter that can shift between states based on specific triggers. The handprint must have activated the transition sequence. Can we reverse it? Close the door? Unknown. But I'd like to find out." Ashford approached the opening and shined his light through. "There's a chamber on the other side. Large. Maybe 50 feet across. And there's light coming from somewhere. I can see illumination, but no obvious source." They entered the chamber one by one, weapons and instruments ready. The space was larger than Ashford had estimated, closer to 80 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that rose 30 feet above the floor. And he was right about the light. The entire chamber was softly illuminated, as if the walls themselves were glowing. In the center of the chamber was a pillar, 8 feet tall, 3 feet in diameter, made of the same metal as everything else, and hovering above the pillar, rotating slowly, was a sphere identical to the one they'd found on the surface. "We've found the control center," Ellis said quietly. "Or the heart of the facility. Or both." Ashford approached the pillar carefully, scanning as he went. "The sphere is generating the electromagnetic field I detected earlier. Low intensity, but highly focused. It's also producing the light in this chamber, some kind of luminescence effect in the wall material triggered by the field." "What's it controlling?" Morrison asked. "If I had to guess, everything. This facility is a machine, and this is the processor." Dustin was studying the pillar when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were marks on the metal, scratches. Dozens of them, all around the base of the pillar. And they weren't random. They formed patterns. Symbols. The same symbols he'd seen on the excavator's bucket. And one of them was fresh. "Ashford," Dustin said, "look at this." The scientist came over and examined the marks. His expression behind the faceplate was grim. "These are recent. Within the last few hours. Something has been here, in this chamber, while we were excavating above. How is that possible? We've been here the whole time." "Not the whole time. Remember when you went back to quarters? Between 0330 and 08 o'clock? 5 hours when this chamber was accessible but unobserved. You're saying something came down here? Past all our security? Past the armed guards? I'm saying these marks weren't here yesterday and they are here now. Which means..." The sphere stopped rotating. Everyone froze. The sphere hung motionless above the pillar, no longer spinning. And then it began to descend, lowering itself toward the pillar's surface. "Back up," Morrison ordered. "Everyone out of the chamber, now." They didn't argue. The team retreated toward the entrance, keeping their eyes on the sphere. It touched the pillar, and the moment it made contact, everything changed. The walls began to shift. Not moving. Transforming. The patterns etched into the metal started rearranging themselves, flowing like liquid, forming new configurations. The soft illumination intensified, becoming harsh and white. and the subsonic hum that had been present since they entered the facility suddenly spiked into audibility, a deep, resonant tone that Dustin felt in his chest. "Yow, we're coming out," Morrison shouted into his radio. "Prepare for emergency evacuation." "Copy that." Yow's voice was broken by static. "But we have a problem. The entrance ladder is—" Her words dissolved into noise. They ran. Single file. Back through the doorway that was no longer liquefied but had resolidified behind them. Down the corridor toward the junction. Costa was leading now, Rivers taking rear guard, making sure no one fell behind. They reached the junction and took the left path, back toward the entrance chamber. But when they got there, something was wrong. The ladder was gone. Not removed, not damaged, simply not there. The shaft above them was sealed with metal, as if the ladder had never existed. They were trapped. "What the hell?" Costa was looking up at the sealed shaft, confusion and fear in his voice. Yow's voice crackled through the static on their radios. "Inside. The facility is sealing, can't maintain." Then her signal cut out completely. Morrison tried his radio. Nothing but static. The same breathing rhythm static Dustin had heard when the lights appeared above the excavation site. "We're being locked in," Ellis said. "The facility is responding to our presence. It's treating us as, I don't know, intruders, threats, or samples," Ashford added quietly. "Specimens to be studied." The 6 doorways around the entrance chamber all began to glow. The same pale blue light they'd seen on the door in the corridor. And through each doorway, Dustin could see shapes moving. Not human shapes. Too angular. Too many limbs. They were surrounded. Rivers and Costa immediately took defensive positions, weapons trained on the doorways. But Morrison raised his hand. "Hold fire. We don't know what we're dealing with. Let's not make this worse." "Worse than being trapped underground with unknown hostiles?" Costa's voice was tight with tension. "Yes. Much worse. If these entities wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. They sealed us in. They're in control, which means they want something from us." The shapes in the doorways didn't advance. They stayed in the corridors, just at the edge of visibility. Dustin tried to focus on one, tried to see details, but his eyes kept sliding off it, like looking at the wall patterns earlier. His brain couldn't quite process what it was seeing. The sphere from the control chamber emerged from one of the doorways. It floated into the entrance chamber, still glowing with that pale blue light, and positioned itself in the center of the room. The shapes in the doorways moved closer, but still didn't enter. Then the sphere split. Just like the lights above the excavation. One moment it was a single sphere. The next moment it was 3 arranged in a triangular formation, each one identical. "It's communicating," Ellis said. "The division pattern. It's showing us what happened on the surface. It's trying to establish context." The 3 spheres rotated around each other, slowly at first, then faster. As they spun, the chamber's illumination began to pulse in rhythm, and Dustin realized he could feel the pulse, not just see it, but feel it, in his bones, in his teeth, like the chamber itself had become a giant speaker, and they were standing inside the sound. Images began to form in the air between the 3 spheres. Not solid images, more like projections, but 3-dimensional, rendered in light. Dustin saw the desert surface, the excavation site, the trench. Then the perspective shifted, pulling back, rising up until they were looking down at Hawthorne Army Depot from high altitude. And there were more spheres, dozens of them, scattered across the depot's grounds, each one marking a location. Underground facilities just like this one, all connected, all part of a massive network that extended beneath the entire depot. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. "There isn't just one facility. there are dozens, maybe hundreds. The image shifted again, time was reversing, the depot disappeared. The buildings, the bunkers, the roads, all gone. They were looking at empty desert, then further back, the landscape changed. Less arid, more vegetation. A river where no river existed today. The spheres showed them the facility being built, not by humans, by the shapes that were still watching from the doorways. Dustin could see them more clearly in the projection. They were mechanical, definitely, but biological too. Hybrid entities that combined aspects of both. And they were building the network of chambers and corridors, installing the spheres, programming the systems. Then the image jumped forward in time. Humans appeared. Not modern humans. These looked like prehistoric people, hunter-gatherers, moving across the landscape in small groups. They were avoiding the areas where the facilities had been built, as if they could sense that something was wrong with those locations, as if instinct told them to stay away. But over time, that instinct faded. Generations passed. The humans forgot why certain areas were forbidden. They built settlements, traded routes. Eventually, in the 20th century, the U.S. military chose this location for an ammunition depot, built their bunkers directly over the ancient facilities, never knowing what was beneath them. The image showed the facility detecting the activity above, monitoring, recording, but not interfering, just watching as humans stacked thousands of tons of explosives directly overhead. Then, recently, the image showed a date. April 17, 2019, something changed. One of the spheres on the surface began to malfunction. Dustin recognized the location, Bunker 47, where Travis Kellerman had seen the lights. The sphere had activated prematurely, sending out a signal that disrupted electronics and affected human consciousness. The facility responded by trying to retrieve the malfunctioning sphere. Hence, the light splitting into three. That was the retrieval protocol. But the attempt failed. The sphere couldn't be recovered without exposing the entire facility. So, the facility did the next best thing. It adapted its protocols. It learned to operate more carefully, to avoid detection, to minimize human interaction. But it kept monitoring, kept recording, kept watching. And it had been particularly interested in maintenance worker patterns, in vehicles that operated near the buried facilities, in excavation work that might accidentally expose the network. Which is why, when Rhett's excavator started digging in Zone 9, the facility responded immediately, took control of the equipment, guided the excavation to the precise location where the access sphere was buried, made sure it was found. It wanted us to find it, Dustin said. This whole thing, the lights, the self-operating excavator, it was deliberate. It wanted us to open the facility. But why? Ellis asked. The image changed one more time. It showed the present day, but it didn't stop there. It continued forward, projecting into the future. Days, weeks, months. And Dustin saw something that made his stomach drop. The ammunition stored in the bunkers above was degrading. Slowly. Imperceptibly. But degrading nonetheless. And in approximately 14 months, one specific type of ordnance, a particular batch of artillery shells stored in Bunker 34, would reach critical instability. When those shells detonated, they would trigger a chain reaction. Bunker 34 would explode. The shock wave would destabilize Bunker 35, then 36, then 37, a cascading failure that would eventually involve most of the depot's southern sector. And all of that explosive force would be directed downward, directly into the facility network, destroying everything, erasing thousands of years of data, of records, of preservation. The entities couldn't allow that. So they did the only thing they could. They revealed themselves. made contact, brought humans down into the facility so they could understand the threat. "It's asking for help," Ashford said, "or warning us, or both." The three spheres merged back into one. The projection faded. The shapes in the doorways stepped forward, fully entering the chamber for the first time. Dustin finally got a clear look at them. They were about 7 feet tall, built on a roughly humanoid template. 2 legs, 2 arms, a head, but clearly not human. The proportions were wrong. The limbs had too many joints. The torso was too long. And the head was dominated by clusters of sensor organs that might have been eyes, or might have been something else entirely. But despite their alien appearance, there was something almost familiar about them. They moved with purpose. They communicated with each other using gestures that suggested language. They were intelligent, conscious. Whatever else they were people. Just not human people. One of them approached Dustin. Not threatening, just curious. It tilted its head, studying him the way he'd been studying the facility's architecture. Then it raised one of its hands, 3 fingers, 1 thumb, perfectly functional, and pointed up. The meaning was clear. They needed to go back to the surface. They needed to report what they'd found. They needed to convince the humans above that the ammunition had to be moved, that the depot's southern sector had to be decommissioned, that the facility network had to be protected. "Will they let us leave?" Costa asked Morrison. The lead entity seemed to understand the question. It moved to the center of the chamber, where the entrance shaft had been sealed. It placed its hand on the metal. The same blue glow spread from the point of contact, and the metal began to liquefy. Within seconds, the shaft was open again. The ladder was back, extending upward towards the surface. "I think that's our answer," Morrison said. "We're free to go." They climbed, one by one, moving quickly but carefully. As Dustin ascended, he looked back down at the chamber one last time. The entities were standing in a circle, watching them leave. The sphere hovered above them, pulsing softly with blue light. They weren't hostile. They weren't invaders. They were refugees. Survivors of something that had happened long before humans existed. And they'd been hiding here beneath the Nevada desert, maintaining their facility network, preserving their knowledge, hoping that whatever had destroyed their civilization wouldn't find them here. But now they were in danger again, not from an external threat, but from human ignorance, from the very people who'd built a military installation directly on top of their hidden refuge. Dustin reached the surface at 01:23. Dawn was still hours away. The excavation site was surrounded by anxious personnel. Yao was there, looking relieved, and Laura Vickers, and at least 20 security officers. "What happened down there?" Vickers demanded as soon as Morrison emerged. "We lost contact, the entrance sealed. We were about to mount a rescue operation." "Stand down," Morrison said. "We're all safe, but we need to talk, privately, and we need to get Dr. Ashford's full report to whoever has authority over this depot's long-term operations." They spent the next 6 hours in debriefing. Everything was documented: the chamber, the entities, the projections, the warning about the unstable ammunition. Dr. Ashford's report was transmitted to Washington within the hour, flagged with the highest priority classification. The response came back at 09 Aquai. All ammunition in the southern sector was to be relocated immediately. Bunker 34 and surrounding structures were to be decommissioned and demolished. The excavation site in Zone 9 was to be sealed and declared permanently off-limits. No public explanation would be given. The official story would be routine facility upgrades and safety improvements. But Dustin knew the truth, and so did the 7 other people who'd gone down into the facility. They'd made contact. They'd communicated with something utterly non-human, yet undeniably intelligent. and they'd reached an understanding. The facility network would remain hidden. The entities would continue their long vigil, maintaining their systems, preserving their records. And humans would unknowingly protect them by avoiding certain areas, by routing roads around specific locations, by building their bunkers in carefully selected positions. It had been happening for decades. The depot's inefficient road layouts, the seemingly arbitrary placement of restricted zones, the locations that maintenance workers instinctively avoided, all of it had been subtly influenced by the facility network. Not control, just gentle guidance, nudging human decisions in directions that avoided exposure. And it had worked, until Rhett's excavator started digging in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dustin was released from debriefing at 1400 and told to take the rest of the week off. Paid leave, see a counselor if needed, standard protocol for traumatic incidents. He drove back to his apartment in Hawthorne and sat on his balcony, looking out over the town. Somewhere beyond the visible horizon, beneath hundreds of feet of rock and desert sand, the facility network was still operating, still recording, still waiting. The entities had shown him something else in those projections, something he hadn't mentioned in his debriefing, because he wasn't sure he believed it himself, wasn't sure he wanted to believe it. They'd shown him what would happen in the far future, centuries from now, millennia, when whatever had destroyed their original civilization finally found them here, when the hiding ended and the reckoning came, and they'd shown him humans, still here, still surviving, standing alongside the entities, fighting together against something vast and terrible that Dustin's mind couldn't fully comprehend. It might have been a prediction, or a hope, or just a possibility, one potential future among infinite others. But it suggested something profound, that the relationship between humans and the entities wasn't ending here. It was just beginning. 3 nights later, Dustin was back at work. Different location, Zone 14, far from the excavation site. But the same job. Maintenance, fixing things, keeping the depot running. He was testing a generator when he saw them. 3 lights in the sky, arranged in a triangular formation, hovering about 200 feet up. He watched as they split apart, moved independently for a moment, then came back together. A single point of light. Then they were gone. Nobody else seemed to have noticed. The other workers kept doing their jobs, unaware of what had just happened overhead. But Dustin understood. It was a message, a greeting, a reminder that they were still there, still watching, still maintaining their long vigil beneath the desert. He went back to work on the generator. The wrench in his hand felt solid and real. The simple mechanics of the engine were familiar and comforting. But he couldn't stop thinking about what lay beneath his feet, about the network of chambers and corridors and preservation systems, about the entities who'd been here long before humans arrived, and who would probably be here long after humans were gone. He finished the repair and logged it in his tablet. Everything was normal. Everything was functioning correctly. The depot would continue operating as it always had. And somewhere below, in chambers that weren't supposed to exist, the entities would continue their work. Recording. Preserving. Waiting for the day when they might need to ask humanity for help again. Or when humanity might need to ask them. Dustin looked up at the stars. The sky was clear. No clouds, no lights, just the vast emptiness of space stretching away forever. But he knew now that space wasn't empty. That even here, in the Nevada desert, in the middle of nowhere, there were others. Watching. Waiting. Surviving. The sky had split in 3 that night. But what it had really done was open, revealing depths he'd never imagined, connections he'd never suspected. And now he couldn't unsee them. Over the next 6 weeks, the southern sector transformation happened faster than anyone had anticipated. Convoy after convoy removed ammunition from bunkers 34 through 41. The explosives were redistributed to facilities in Utah, Arizona, and California. By the end of August, the entire zone around the excavation site had been cleared. Dustin watched it happen from his observation post assignments. He'd been rotated into surveillance duty, officially because they needed experienced personnel monitoring the relocation operation. But he suspected the real reason was that someone wanted him where they could keep an eye on him, where he could report any anomalies immediately. He saw them 3 more times during that period. The first was on July 28th at 03:17 in the morning. A single light appeared over the now empty Bunker 36, hovered for exactly 90 seconds, then split into 3. The 3 lights performed a complex pattern, weaving through the air like they were tracing some invisible geometric form, then merged back together and descended straight down through the roof of the bunker. Dustin reported it immediately. An investigation team arrived within the hour and found subtle changes inside the bunker. Equipment had been moved, not by much, but precisely repositioned. Security footage showed nothing. 23 seconds of missing recording, just like the convoy incident. The second sighting was on August 4th. This time it wasn't at the depot. Dustin had driven into Hawthorne town for supplies when he saw them. 3 lights in perfect formation, moving slowly across the sky from east to west. He pulled over and watched. Other people noticed too. He heard car doors opening, voices calling out, phones being raised to capture video. But when he checked his own phone, the camera wouldn't focus. Every image came out blurred, distorted, just like Marcus's photos from that first night. The lights passed overhead and disappeared beyond the western mountains. The local news ran a story the next day about a meteor sighting, but Dustin knew better. The entities were conducting surveys, maybe checking for other potential exposure risks, other locations where human activity might threaten their facilities. The third sighting happened on August 19th, and this one was different. Dustin was working late at the maintenance yard, finishing paperwork from the day's repairs. Everyone else had gone home. The yard was quiet, just the hum of security lights and the distant sound of night insects. He stepped outside for some air and immediately felt it, that same subsonic vibration he'd experienced in the underground facility. The feeling of standing on top of something vast and active. He looked up and saw a single light descending toward the yard. Not fast, not threatening, just lowering itself carefully, deliberately, until it hovered about 30 feet above the ground, directly over the maintenance building. Dustin's first instinct was to run, to call security, to report the incident. But something stopped him. The light wasn't behaving like the others. It wasn't splitting, wasn't moving in patterns. It was just waiting. He stood there, watching it, and realized it was waiting for him specifically. "What do you want?" he said aloud, feeling ridiculous talking to a ball of light. The sphere descended further. 20 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. Close enough now that Dustin could see it wasn't solid. It was made of something that looked like dense clouds of luminous particles, swirling internally, constantly rearranging themselves into new configurations. And then it showed him something. Not a projection this time. This was different. The images appeared directly in his mind, bypassing his eyes entirely. He saw the facility network as it truly was, not just the chambers and corridors he'd explored, but the full extent of it. Hundreds of installation sites spread across Nevada, Utah, parts of California and Arizona. A preservation network that covered thousands of square miles, all of it hidden beneath military bases, protected lands, remote desert areas where humans rarely went. He saw how long they'd been there. Not thousands of years. tens of thousands. The entities had arrived during the last ice age, when this desert was grassland and megafauna still roamed North America. They'd built their facilities deep underground, far from the primitive humans who were just beginning to spread across the continent. And he saw why they'd come. They were refugees, yes, but not from war or natural disaster. They were refugees from time itself. Their civilization had achieved something humans hadn't even theorized yet. They'd learned to manipulate temporal mechanics, to move forward through time deliberately, jumping across centuries and millennia. But something had gone wrong. A catastrophic miscalculation had fragmented their species across multiple timelines, scattering them through different epochs, different versions of Earth's history. The entities in the Nevada facilities were one fragment. Survivors who'd emerged in the Pleistocene era and decided to hide, to wait, to preserve their knowledge until their technology could advance enough to attempt reunion with the other fragments. They'd been waiting for 47,000 years. And now, finally, they were close to having the mathematics worked out. Close to understanding how to navigate the timeline fragmentation and find their lost people. But they needed help. They needed resources they couldn't access themselves. They needed humans. The image shifted. Dustin saw himself, but older. Maybe 10 years older. Standing in a laboratory that didn't exist yet. Working alongside one of the entities, both of them focused on complex equations displayed on screens that showed mathematics beyond current human understanding. This was a potential future. A possibility. A path that opened if he made certain choices. "You're asking me to help you," Dustin said. The sphere pulsed once. Affirmative. "Why me? I'm just a maintenance worker. I fix generators and replace hydraulic lines. I'm not a scientist." Another image. This one showed the moment when Dustin had climbed into the underground facility. The moment he'd decided to go, despite the danger, despite the fear. That decision had marked him. The entities had been watching humans for thousands of years, studying behavior patterns, learning how to predict choices. Most humans would have run. Most would have prioritized their own safety. But Dustin had chosen to understand, to communicate, to help. That made him valuable. That made him someone they could work with. "What happens if I say no?" Dustin asked. The sphere showed him another future. This one had no laboratories, no collaboration. Just Dustin going back to his normal life, fixing equipment, never speaking about what he'd seen. The entities would continue alone, working through their calculations slowly, carefully. It would take them another century, maybe 2. But eventually they'd solve it. They'd find their lost fragments, and they'd leave. And humanity would never know what they'd missed, what they could have learned, what partnership they could have formed. And if I say yes, a third future, more complex, harder to parse. But Dustin saw glimpses, breakthroughs in physics, new technologies, human civilization advancing faster than any current projection suggested. But also complications, conflicts, people who feared the entities who wanted them destroyed, political machinations, corporate interests, the military-industrial complex trying to weaponize the technology. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be safe, but it would be extraordinary. "I need time to think about this," Dustin said. The sphere pulsed twice. Understanding, agreement. It began to rise, pulling away from the maintenance yard, ascending back into the night sky. When it reached about 200 feet, it split into 3. The 3 lights performed that same weaving pattern he'd seen before. And now he understood what it was. Not random movement, a signature, a way of saying, "This is us, this is real, remember this." Then they merged back together and vanished. Dustin stood in the empty yard for a long time, processing what he'd just experienced. an invitation, an offer of partnership, a chance to be part of something that transcended normal human experience. He thought about calling Morrison, reporting the contact, but something stopped him. This felt personal, private. The entities had come to him specifically bypassing official channels, bypassing the investigation team. They were asking him to make a choice as an individual, not as a depot employee or a security asset. He went back inside and finished his paperwork, filed his reports, locked up the maintenance building and drove home through the dark Nevada night. His apartment felt small and ordinary after what he'd just seen. After the visions of possible futures, the normal walls and furniture seemed almost absurd in their mundane solidity. He made coffee and sat by the window, watching the sky. Dawn was still 2 hours away. He had time to think. By the time the sun rose, he'd made his decision. He called Morrison at 06:30. "I need to talk to you. In person. Not at the depot." They met at a diner in Hawthorne at 07:00. Morrison looked exhausted. The relocation operation had been running him ragged, but he listened carefully as Dustin described the contact, the visions, the offer. "They're asking you to be a liaison," Morrison said when Dustin finished. "An interface between their species and ours. That's not a small thing." "I know. It's also not something you can do alone. If you're serious about this, we need to bring in resources. Scientists, linguists, people who can actually understand the mathematics and physics they're working with." "Will the government allow that?" Morrison smiled grimly. "The government doesn't have a choice. The entities are here whether we like it or not. We can either work with them or pretend they don't exist. And pretending didn't work out so well, did it? So, what happens now? Now, we establish formal contact protocols. We set up a research division. Classified, of course, but properly funded and staffed. We bring in the best minds we can find, people who can handle the knowledge without freaking out. And we start learning." Morrison leaned forward. "But understand something, Karev. This changes everything. Your life, your career, your future. Once you step into this role, there's no going back to normal maintenance work." "I know," Dustin said. And he did. He'd known it the moment he'd climbed down that ladder into the underground facility. Known it when he'd seen the entities standing in their circle, watching him. Known it when the sphere had shown him those possible futures. Some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed. 6 months later, Dustin was working in a new facility, not underground this time, but a specially constructed laboratory building at the depot's northern edge. The official designation was Advanced Materials Research Division, which was technically true, but wildly understated the actual work being done. The team had grown to 23 people, physicists, mathematicians, engineers, and specialists in fields that barely had names yet. Dr. Ellis had joined full-time, along with Dr. Ashford. They'd brought in talent from universities and national laboratories, people who'd signed NDAs so comprehensive that they essentially signed away their ability to discuss their work with anyone outside the program. And they'd made progress. Remarkable progress. The entities had been generous with their knowledge, sharing principles and equations that human science was still decades away from discovering independently. In exchange, humans provided resources the entities couldn't access. Rare earth elements, computational power, and most importantly, hands that could work in the surface world without risk of exposure. Dustin's role had evolved. He wasn't just a liaison anymore. He'd become something like a project coordinator, managing the interface between human researchers and entity experts. He'd learned to recognize individual entities. They had distinctive movement patterns, communication styles, preferences in how they structured information. He'd even learned some of their gestural language. though his human hands couldn't quite replicate the full complexity of their three-fingered articulation. He stood in the laboratory now, watching Dr. Ellis work with one of the entities on a temporal mathematics problem. The entity, Dustin had mentally nicknamed it Compass because of its tendency to orient toward magnetic north, was displaying equations on a holographic interface that the entities had helped the team construct. Ellis was frantically taking notes, occasionally asking questions that Compass would answer with elaborate gesture sequences. "We're close," Ellis said, glancing at Dustin. "Another 6 months, maybe a year, and we'll have the core calculations complete. They'll actually be able to attempt the reunion." "And then what?" Dustin asked. "Then we find out if there are really other fragments scattered through time, and if we can help bring them together." Ellis smiled. "Think about it, Karev. We might be about to witness the reunification of a species that's been broken apart for 50,000 years. That's unprecedented." Dustin thought about the vision the sphere had shown him. The laboratory, the collaboration, the future that unfolded from these choices. It was happening. It was real. They were actually doing it. His phone buzzed. A message from Morrison. "New sighting, Zone 12. 3 lights, same pattern. They're checking on us." Dustin smiled. Of course they were. The entities were cautious, careful, constantly verifying that their partnership with humans was proceeding safely. They'd been hiding for so long that trust didn't come easily. He stepped outside the laboratory and looked up at the night sky. Clear and dark, stars scattered across the blackness like the luminous particles inside the spheres. Somewhere up there, or down below, or in some adjacent time stream. The other fragments of the entity species were waiting, lost, hoping for reunion. And here, in the Nevada desert, in a place where humans had once stacked explosives without knowing what lay beneath them, 2 species were working together to make that reunion possible. The sky had split in 3 that night, but what it had really done was offer a choice, a path, a future that diverged from everything humanity had expected. Dustin had taken that path, and now there was no turning back. He watched the stars for another moment, then went back inside. There was work to do, calculations to verify, protocols to establish, futures to build. The lights would split again. They always did. It was their way of saying, "We're here, we're watching, we're with you." And Dustin would be watching too. Always watching. Always ready. Because the sky wasn't a ceiling anymore. It was a door. And beyond it lay possibilities that humanity was only beginning to understand.